Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is distorted reality in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 5, The King of Jiduan. The beauty of the Fire Nation sometimes made Aang want to burn it all away, to do to them what Ozai did to the Earth Kingdom. But those were dark, dangerous thoughts. He was the Avatar. The bridge between the spirits and nature and humans and innovation. He was an air nomad. He was supposed to treasure growth like this, a rare gem not found in the rest of the world. Greenery like he hadn't seen in over a year grew from the mountain slopes, turning to gold as the rising sun crested over the eastern horizon. A dusty village rested far away at the base of the mountain, its squalor so at odds with the natural beauty surrounding it. Katara had insisted it was a terrible idea to come to the Fire Nation, the heart of their enemy. But Sokka reasoned that the whole world belonged to them now and it was just as perilous as anywhere else. If they were lucky, an opportunity to attack Phoenix King Ozai might present itself. Perhaps he would make a stately visit to the outlying villages and lord his power over the people. And also, perhaps, the dormant volcano beneath Royal Caldera City would awaken and kill him, and Azula in a cauldron of fire, and miraculous peace would come. Aang felt reasonably certain he had mastered all four elements, or had at least come close to it. He thought he could take Ozai in a one-on-one battle now. Now that the comet had come and gone, he was just one master firebender. The problem was finding an opportunity for that to present itself. They had no friends who could help mount an invasion force to get him in the Phoenix King's proximity anymore. He decided to stop fake meditating and joined his friends back at camp. Zuko took inventory of their supplies while Suki brushed Appa. She often volunteered to do that, more than even Aang nowadays. She confessed to him once that it reminded her of a different time, a great mission where she had succeeded in carrying out one of her most important tasks. He didn't press her for details. A top knot and then Sokka's face appeared over the hill leading toward the path to the village. Topha's head bobbed up at his side a moment later, her gait harsher than normal as each footfall felt like a stomping clarion to Aang's earth-bending senses. Something had angered her. He gave them his full attention, eager to hear the news they brought back from the village. "Guys, something bad happened," Sokka said, confirming his suspicions. Katara's wrists rolled and twisted in a rhythm over a pot of vegetable broth, stirring that night's dinner, but she stopped at her brother's words. "What is it?" "Long Feng," Sokka said. "He's working with the Fire Nation." The broth turned to ice and Katara's posture hardened with it, her shoulders quaking with rage and the memory of Jet's demise. Zuko tightened the drawstring of one of their supply bags and furrowed his brow. "Who's Long Feng?" "Just some more trouble," said Toph, rubbing a knuckle as if she wanted the former Grand Secretariat there so she could plant it in his face. She stomped her foot again, but then her eyes widened and she threw herself at Aang just as an arrow bit deep into his shoulder. "Aang! Aang! Aang! Aang!" Azula's shouts pulled him from his sleep and the crushing weight of years of loss bore down on him, his world shifting from hazy memory to bleak reality. Both worlds felt equally as stifling and humid. "Ahh!" he cried out upon seeing Azula's face. She jumped back as his arms went up reflexively to protect himself. It took him a moment to realize he was safe. "What was that for?" Azula asked him, standing up and brushing the dirt off her clothes. "I was just waking you up to tell you we're leaving." Aang exhaled with relief. "Okay. Sorry, Azula," he said, looking up into the blue sky above. Why was he having these nightmares? They only reminded him that he needed to get back home, and quickly. He didn't know what was happening to his friends without him. Other than that, they were only bringing painful memories to the surface. Back in the real world, he still had the scar from the arrow wound, which Katara thankfully healed after they fought off the assassin. Every scar that he previously received, including the one from Azula's lightning bolt through his back and foot, disappeared in this world, leaving his skin healthy and his body undamaged. He looked at the Azula and memories of lightning shook him to the core. If the opportunity ever presented itself, he would be sure to never give this Azula the opportunity to learn to bend lightning. He wasn't ashamed to admit to himself the fear of lightning linking them together like a chain, as if it would awaken something in this Azula he'd rather not see. Because of the dreams, he was getting more desperate to return home. He needed some kind of advice from someone he could rely on. Avatar Roku, his biggest link to the spirit world, was out, at least through his temple at Crescent Island that wasn't there in this world. There were precious few possibilities left that he could rely on, and even fewer that he knew even existed in this weird world. After packing up camp and flying away on Appa, Aang decided to ask Zuko and Azula if they knew one of them. "Do either of you happen to know someone named King Bumi?" he asked them. Both of them stared at him blankly. What about Omashu, in the Earth Kingdom? Everything else he knew seemed to be in the wrong place, so it was worth a try. "No, we've never heard of either," Azula responded. "We've never left our village before." Aang sighed and lowered his eyes, beginning to give up hope of ever returning home. Bumi could have at least offered advice to him. "I haven't either, but there is a city with a king not far from here," Zuko said. "And it's Earth Kingdom." Aang stared at him, confused. "An Earth Kingdom city, in the Fire Nation? How would you know?" Azula asked him, her voice ringing with doubt. "Oh, wait. You're always sitting in your room and studying maps instead of doing something useful like hunting, I forgot." At this comment, her brother looked away, hiding an embarrassed blush on his face. "Actually, it was from that man that visited our village a few years ago, remember? He said he came from Jiduan to the north. I was looking at our map before and we're really close to it. Well, it was worth looking into." "Alright, we'll head there then," Aang decided. He turned around and pulled on the reins, steering Appa toward the southwest. "Why?" Azula's question cut through the wind, a doubt in Aang that she decided to air rather than let fester. "Why bring us to all these places? You stopped us at the Western Air Temple and then Crescent Island for pointless reasons. You've brought us far out of the way of our intended destination and I'd rather not face more trouble on our way to the Golden City. I'll explain when we get there." She crossed her arms and said nothing, setting her lips in a thin line that made Aang think of a crack in a pane of glass. Zuko had been right. It only took them an hour to get to the city of Jiduan, situated at the very edge of the mainland, the eastern archipelago beginning in its wake. More like a large village, it clung to the mountains at the highest altitude possible as if climbing to get away from the water. Terraces made a stairway down the mountainside, ending at a bay nestled in the crook between the eastern archipelago and the southern, at the end of which Zuko and Azula's village lay. As they neared the landmass, Aang could see water shimmering in the sunlight of each terrace, meaning they could only be a series of rice paddies. Jiduan mostly clung to the mountainsides the same way trees did, with homes dotting the slopes above and around the rice paddies, solid structures on leveled ground made of stone and wood like in the Earth Kingdom. A broad, leafy plant called an arrowhead littered the mountains like a dark vein corrupting the water, a common infestation for rice paddies that weren't properly maintained. They even grew over some of the houses like strangling ivy. On the higher levels, Aang saw signs of construction. Homes and shops and tea houses cropped up the higher they went, though he wondered if they were for presentation more than anything because there didn't seem to be enough of a population in Jiduan to live in all of them. When not twisting to meet the standards of the natural mountainside, the other buildings had been arranged in an orderly grid. The few people they did see cowered away from the bison as it flew over them until Appa landed and they meandered up the rising incline toward the largest building at the mountain's peak, something of a palace. These people feared the war. But even with the abundance of rice paddies, Aang saw hunger, which he knew as well as he knew war. Jiduan seemed intimately acquainted with it themselves. Children huddled together under the eaves of empty houses, scrounging for scraps discarded by soldiers. He saw only soldiers and no peacekeepers, and began planning out escape routes in case they needed to make a quick getaway. The weapons wielded by these soldiers and the armor they wore seemed cared for more than the people, gleaming with cleanliness in the sunlight. Aang, Zuko, and Azula walked among the people and Earth Kingdom soldiers of the city's streets. The two siblings looked around uneasily. "So why did you want to come here?" Zuko echoed Azula's earlier question, eyeing some rough-looking people in one of the side alleys. "I used to have a friend named Bumi," he answered, not at all worried about any potential thieves or fights. Aang could handle that. "I need to speak with him." "But, that was a while ago," Zuko said to him, voice heavy with sympathy. He's not. At least, he shouldn't be," Aang said firmly. "Bumi lived through age in his world, didn't he? Azula didn't kill him here, at least not yet. It didn't take long at all for them to approach the palace gates, far more impressive than the rest of the town and emblazoned with the insignia of an erupting volcano. The guards immediately seemed defensive. "Stand down," Aang told them, holding his palms out to them. "I would simply like to meet with the king. I am the Avatar. There is nothing to fear from me." He tried his best to take on the guise of a commanding, respected adult. The guards looked at each other and then rushed to obey his orders, leading them inside of the palace. The three kids and the lemur were led to a lavishly decorated room off of the main hall of the palace and then left alone. Azula made a beeline for the pile of cushions and silks and lounged on them, helping herself to the bowl of papayas on a short table next to her. Zuko frowned at her with disapproval and sat cross-legged at the tea table, pouring himself and Aang a cup of spiced herbal tea that was surprisingly more Fire Nation than he expected to find in a place that reminded him so much of the Earth King's palace in Ba Sing Se. And yet, this palace had none of the age or timelessness of a mountain, no hint of the countless and sometimes clashing styles of centuries of dynasties piling atop each other. Barely a speck of dust kissed the tabletops and corners of the room. And he kept seeing the insignia of the volcano, a stark reminder that this was a mix between earth and fire. The insignia of burning earth. Aang did not yet touch either the fruit or the tea, sitting in front of the table with his back straight and staring patiently ahead, waiting for the arrival of the king. If he wasn't his old friend Bumi, then he wanted to be on guard, just in case. Now was not the time to act childish. There were two doors in front of them, one the entrance and the other leading to some other room or hall. In the center was a raised platform, meant for the king's seat when meeting guests. Aang was mildly surprised that they were able to get into the palace so fast, but hoped that it was indeed Bumi and it was because he loved to meet guests, but more and more told him that it couldn't be his friend. This king cared too much about appearances. His blank gaze turned to the door as it opened. Three robed men came in, wearing conical hats. It took almost no time at all for Aang to recognize who they were with their dark colors and hands folded behind their backs the Daily. His eyes hardened. What were they doing here? The last figure to walk into the room made the Avatar's brow crease and his grip tighten on his staff in his lap. Long Feng strode confidently into the room, looking at them with fake kindness written all over his face. He sat down in the king's seat, his robes far more opulent than Aang had ever seen him wear, with jade rings encircling his fingers, gold woven into the black and emerald of his robes, and a mustache and beard that might have been 2 or 3 times longer than he remembered. He wondered about the change to his facial hair and couldn't help but think of how he wanted to pull them right off the man's face. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, young Avatar," he said. It was the same deep, lightly scornful tone he remembered. Aang's knuckles turned white. This man killed Jet and was responsible for many more deaths in Ba Sing Se and the Earth Kingdom when he joined Ozai. It took all of his willpower to hold back from attacking him. "I am King Long Feng, ruler of Jiduan. I am Aang," he said, his voice plain and restrained. "These are my friends, Azula and Zuko." It was then that he realized that he far preferred this nice Azula to Long Feng. "Please, eat your food. You must be tired and hungry from your long journey," the ex-Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se said. "No thanks, I'm not hungry," Aang replied. Zuko and Azula seemed fine to let him do all the talking, but they both listened attentively. The latter sat with her back to the wall as if to take in every detail. Aang knew because he would have liked to do the same. "I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind." One of the king's brows rose as he took a sip of wine and straightened his posture. "And what would they be?" His Daily agents loomed behind him like a pair of guard towers. "Why is there an Earth Kingdom town and king in the Fire Nation?" Aang didn't want to mention Ba Sing Se or Omashu just in case they didn't exist. He did not want Long Feng to be suspicious. He was a dangerous enemy, and the less he knew, the better. "You do not know the current state of affairs in the Earth Kingdom?" Long Feng asked him. Aang shook his head. "The war with the Water Nation has become disastrous for the Earth Kingdom. Every month at the full moon, the waterbenders' powers increase and they are able to mount successful, and devastating, invasions. They hold many of the shores and it is considered dangerous to be near water. The Fire Nation is relatively untouched by the war, and the people came to live here for a safe haven." "Untouched?" said Zuko, scowling. Have you seen outside of your city at all? Long Feng's temple twitched as he regarded Zuko. I assure you, it would be a lot worse if we weren't here. We have soldiers stationed all over the Fire Nation mainland defending from assaults from the seas, independent of the Golden City, who, I might inform you, only bothers to defend their northern territories. We've had to do what we must in order to maintain stability in the absence of the Avatar for 100 years. Since I've come to this city, we've made many great strides toward protecting the people of the Fire Nation. But a king? Aang asked, ignoring the slight against him. He filed away that comment on the Golden City for later, aware of the possibility that he could be lying. Couldn't they have sent a governor or something? Jiduan is considered separate from the rest of the Earth Kingdom. I have had a disagreement with the king of Ba Sing Se, Ki, in the past. We split, and I came to rule here. I rule all of the Earth Kingdom villages in the Fire Nation. The Golden City allows us to stay, he said, his voice layered with malicious intent, as it always was. Aang did not want to know what their disagreement was. So the Earth Kingdom is split in two, Aang mused. Much more than that, nowadays, but yes. What about Omashu? Can you tell me anything about them or King Bumi? Is he still alive? He asked the end hopefully. Omashu was invaded by the water tribes 5 years ago. The city was close to the water despite the ring of mountains around it, and they have fought miraculously for the last 100 years, but they were not able to withstand every full moon. They fell, and now the city is in ruins, Long Feng informed him. And King Bumi? Aang asked again. The king shook his head and averted his eyes, and Aang had no way of knowing if he spoke the truth. I know not of his fate. Aang lowered his gaze. Was there any hope left for him? After a long pause, Aang looked into Long Feng's cold eyes again. Thank you for answering my questions. We'll let you get back to your work, he said, eager to leave. Azula stood up with him, while Zuko remained seated, looking slightly confused. Long Feng furrowed his brow. You are leaving so soon? Yes, I am, and you can do nothing about it. Aang couldn't keep the coldness out of his voice as he thought of Appa alone outside the city, too close to Long Feng for Aang's comfort. He would never let the Rat Viper threaten someone he cared about again. Never let anyone hold that kind of leverage over him. We have to get on our way. Long Feng reclined on his throne and steepled his fingers. I see. The three stood up and turned away. Thank you for your hospitality. Aang took a step, but found his feet stuck to the floor. He suddenly couldn't move and he lost balance. He windmilled his arms to stop his fall, and a stone hand clamped over them and pinned them behind his back by his wrists, leaving part of his hands free. Aang's head turned to Long Feng, anger all over his face. What do you want? It was the Dai Li agents that had bound him, Zuko, and Azula, who were both in similar positions. Even Sabi, who was perched on his staff, had been attached to it in a stony grip to make it look like some ancient sage's scepter. You will not be leaving so soon. I have a request, Long Feng said, perfectly calm. He folded his fingers under his chin. My adversary, King Ki of Ba Sing Se, chooses not to hand over some of his power, he said, choosing his words carefully. He does not want to play any part in our defense, and his weak kingdom is falling to the water savages. He spoke businesslike, his voice deep and steady like the rumblings of a quake. I believe it would be in all of our best interests if the Earth Kingdom were to come under the rule of another. You mean you, said Azula. Zuko's anger came out in a snarl. No way. Why would we do that? You three kids don't know what I'm capable of, Long Feng said. It sounded simultaneously like an assurance and a threat. I could bring stability to the Earth Kingdom. I did for many years, at least until Omashu fell. I have far more experience than that childish king. And what do you want us to do? Azula asked. Where do we fall into this? Go to Ba Sing Se and gain the king's trust, Long Feng said, standing up and pacing, his hands folded behind his back. Once he completely relies on you for support and strength, I want you to remove him from power. Assassinate him, if you must. You'd hardly be the first Avatar in history to do such a thing. Aang's eyes widened. I believe no one has the strength and the ability to gain his trust like you do, Avatar? And if we refuse? Aang asked, his eyes narrowed. This Long Feng was a desperate man, a puppeteer who once had a whole kingdom under his thumb and lost it all. He wanted power purely for the sake of it, obsessed with the appearance and the illusions while the people outside his palace starved and struggled. "You will not leave," he said simply. His words hung in the air, resonating within Aang. What was going on? He thought this timeline, or whatever it was following his own previous adventures, except just reversing the roles of his friends and enemies. But what was this? This never happened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Something had changed that made the world like this. Was it like Long Feng said? Were the water tribes really that bad? King Ki was a kind man. Aang did not remember the exact last moment he had seen him, but according to Katara and Sokka, the king left them to journey on his own while Aang was in his coma. None of them had ever seen him again, but they heard a little of his whereabouts. Shortly after the fateful day of the comet, the king had assembled a makeshift rebellion to rise against the Fire Nation menace. They had been crushed like insects. Ki was just too inexperienced. Aang didn't know his ultimate fate, but they had assumed the worst. Aang and Zuko were silent, staring into the eyes of their captors, unwavering. The Avatar was trying to formulate a plan to get them out of this situation. Therefore, they were both surprised when Azula spoke up. "Fine, sounds easy enough." "What are you talking about, Azula?" Zuko asked her, squinting at her. "We're supposed to help Aang. You're the one who wanted to go to the Golden City in the first place." "Oh please, Zuzu. Do you really think I wanted to go there for a reason? I just wanted to get out of that miserable little island we lived in. I used the Avatar as an excuse to escape," she said, and she sounded exactly like the Azula that Aang knew. Chills of anger went up and down Aang's spine, coiled inside of him and burned in his belly so hot that he thought he would unleash a breath of fire right there. Buried underneath that, however, was the fear. It still lingered, a beast that stirred in the back of his mind after all this time. "I knew I shouldn't have trusted you," he shouted at her. She was just as malicious, cunning, and evil as she was before. He knew there was no good in Azula. She was the manifestation of malevolence, and she always would be. Zuko struggled against his bonds. "Azula? What are you talking about? You must be crazy." Unfortunately, Long Feng's voice interrupted the three of them. "One young girl isn't enough. I thank you for your offer, but we need the Avatar." "That won't be necessary, Your Majesty," Azula said to him, a look of derision in her eyes. "A master firebender will be enough. Furthermore, I have received training from the assassins on Crescent Island. That will suffice." Aang's eyes betrayed surprise yet again, and he realized she was bluffing. What was she trying to do? Save her own skin? Zuko fell silent, his jaw hanging limp. Long Feng seemed to consider this for a moment. "Fine then. I would like to see a demonstration of your abilities shortly. First, I would like your final decision, Avatar." He glared at Azula with hatred as he spoke. "Never." She smirked with triumph. "I see," Long Feng said, turning on his heel. "I will now take my leave. Girl, I will see you soon to oversee your fire-bending demonstration." He walked out of the room without a glance at any of them. The Dai Li agents followed, leaving one more behind to look after them. "Now," Azula said to the agents sweetly. "Can you let me go? This hurts quite a bit." The agent pondered it for a moment, but their king didn't give him any orders to the contrary, so he freed her hands. She ignored the glares of Aang and Zuko as she stretched. "So what will be done with them?" "They will be put into prison chambers," the Dai Li agent answered. Aang and Zuko stood silent, staring at her with baleful glares. He dared her with his eyes to talk to them. Neither of them struggled out of their bonds, though their feet were freed when Long Feng left so they could be led to the prisons. "We'll see about that," Azula said, her voice low. "I'm sorry?" the Dai Li agent asked. His answer came in the form of a blast of fire to the face, and he screamed as he shielded himself with his arms, his sleeves going ablaze. Azula tackled him shoulder first to knock him to the ground. "Let's get out of here, quickly," she said to Zuko and Aang. Zuko gaped like a fish out of water, but Aang took the moment to jump into action and make his escape, running as fast as the wind out of the room and down the hall, picking up a constricted Sabi and his staff along the way with his exposed fingers and hooking it under his arm. Azula pulled Zuko along after her. They needed to get out before more Dai Li agents heard the man screaming. People looked out of numerous rooms as they passed by, disturbed by the loud wailing. Azula ran as fast as she could, still dragging her unresponsive brother along. When they neared the exit of the palace, he began to regain his bearings and started running on his own. "Azula, what was that?" he asked between breaths as they ran. "I thought you were really betraying us." She just smirked in reply. The siblings rushed through the open palace doors, greeted immediately by warm, refreshing sunlight. Aang watched Azula revel in it for a moment, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath, but the rush of footsteps behind her of pursuing Dai Li made her run faster. Aang led the way through town, dodging around people before the soldiers could recuperate and begin chasing after them. He looked back just to make sure Zuko and Azula skirted at the edge of his vision, even though a large part of him wanted to leave Azula behind. They found Appa surrounded by a squad of 6 soldiers, refusing to fly away and leave his companions. The bison roared at the advancing men, but Aang approached with a wide, sweeping kick that knocked 3 of them off their feet. Another managed to hold his bearings and rushed Aang with a spear, but Aang jumped through a loop of his own arms so his cuffed hands were in front of him and he slapped away the weapon with the rock bindings just in time. He swung his conjoined hands on the soldier's helmet and knocked him out while Zuko barreled into a 4th soldier with a tackle and Azula took down the last one with her fire bending. He regarded Azula with a stony face as they climbed onto the saddle. She pointedly avoided looking at him. With a growl and a wave of his tail, Appa lifted off into the sky, blowing the pursuing Dai Li away with gusts of wind as they assailed them with rocks. It took them no time at all to get a safe distance away from the palace and Azula grinned once they made it out of range, putting her hands behind her head. That was too easy. The Dai Li and that king are all idiots. Aang and Zuko were silent, staring at her as they both struggled to find words. She lost a little bit of her confidence and fire as they stared her down, looking away and pouting. Sabi, wrapped completely in earth except for her head and the tops of her fingers, let out pathetic cries from the floor. "What?" she asked them. "Why did you do that before?" Zuko asked, his tone accusing. "You seemed so convincing," he added in a weaker tone. "I thought you really wanted to turn against us. But it got us out pretty easily, didn't it?" She snapped back at him. "I was hoping you two wouldn't be thick enough to believe me, or even worse, spoil my lies." Aang grimaced. "You could have given us some kind of warning. I was ready to attack you." Azula paused. "I was just trying to help." She folded her arms and looked away from them. They could not see the expression on her face. All of the anger and hatred Aang felt for her moments before immediately melted away to be replaced by overwhelming guilt. He so readily thought of her as a traitor to him, and even though he felt he had good reason to, he also thought he should try to trust her more. The young child buried deep inside him by loss and death was slowly emerging. And it was telling him to forgive and forget. "I'm sorry, Azula," he said quietly. "I knew you wouldn't betray me all along, I think," he said. "But you were really believable, I have to give you that." She looked at him again, allowing a small smile. "Yeah, I guess. Where'd you learn to lie like that?" Zuko asked her. Aang wondered the same. It seemed that this Azula kept all of her cunning and deceit, as well as the princess's brilliant acting. She ignored her brother and looked at Aang. "But why did you think I would turn against you so easily? Don't you know that I want to travel to the Golden City as much as you do? Don't you trust me?" This was a newer, more sensitive side he wasn't used to seeing from Azula. His mind raced for something to say to get him out of this type of situation. "I've had bad experiences in the past," he admitted, averting his eyes. He knew it was a flimsy excuse and she likely thought so as well, but she didn't press him for once. "But I'm willing to keep it there this time." This time, he spoke the absolute truth. He still wanted to get back home, but now his immediate concerns were for the present, in this place. "Then maybe the 3 of us can all start over again, and you can count Zuzu and I as real friends," Azula said, looking at them both. Zuko nodded with agreement. Aang and Azula clasped hands, made somewhat difficult by his bindings, but they managed. Friends, he agreed. He was officially friends with Azula now, he thought with a grin. What was the world coming to? Chapter 6, The Coalition. The monstrous wave followed after the low-flying bison. Aang held onto Appa's reins, pulling them in order to steer in a safer direction. Appa ducked, dodged, and rolled in midair to avoid the blasts of fire that shot at them from the scattering of towers inside the inner walls of Ba Sing Se. The wave of water that followed them was not trying to topple the group, it was a defensive mechanism. In her greatest feat of waterbending yet, Katara held out a gigantic wall of water that trailed behind them in the air, warding off the fiery missiles. Aang had no idea how she had amassed so much water. His head throbbed as the explosions tore through the air. After being in captivity for 2 solid weeks in the dungeons of Ba Sing Se, the Team Avatar finally made their escape. Despite a close call with Azula under the catacombs and a run-in with Mai and Ty Lee, everything else had gone smoothly. It appeared that ever since the greatest Earth Kingdom city's takeover, the Fire Nation turned the palace into their own unstoppable fortress. Aang and the others were captured sometime after Sozin's comet, brutally beaten in the Fire Nation's clutches after they tried for a counter-attack, revenge for their lost friends and loved ones. Aang, and all of the others, had many new bruises and scars to add to their collections. It seemed surreal as Aang guided Appa out to freedom, finally reaching the inner walls of the palace grounds and changing direction. The bison flew directly upwards, keeping them the safest from turret attacks. Unfortunately, as Appa was about to clear the wall into the open sky, they happened to fly right under a turret. Aang cursed his luck as it shot at them, but he was quick enough to raise a thick stone slab from the very wall the turret was on and blocked it. Appa was unable to halt his momentum in time to turn and fly out of the way, and collided right into Aang's earth barrier. The side of the bison crashed into the stone wall, and with a pained roar, Appa groaned and descended in an arc. The force of it threw Aang and the others against the wall. Aang, Toph, and Haru were able to cling onto it with ease. All three managed to make ledges for Sokka, Katara, Zuko, and Suki, who all landed with finesse despite their weakened frames. Katara's water splashed to the ground. Haru hadn't yet left them after the unsuccessful invasion on the day of Black Sun. He seemed determined to prove himself, rescue his father, and help save the world. His bending ability had grown tenfold. A storm of Fire Nation soldiers came from their guard station nearby, grouping at the base of the wall. Bows were pointed at them. They were trapped. Haru lunged forward, raising a protective wall of earth before the soldiers could react. "You guys, get out of here. I'll hold them off." Bowstrings twanged and arrows bounced off of his barrier, but it would only hold until the firebenders arrived. "We're not leaving you here," Katara yelled to him. Aang's heart fluttered. She was so caring, so stubborn. It was one of the many reasons why he loved her. "You have to get on Appa before they do," Haru said, his long hair matted with knots and blood that may not have been his own. Aang could feel earthbenders coming towards them, the Dai Li. Haru's face, now pale and scarred from those awful days in the dungeons, gave a pleading look to Aang. "Please, the world needs you. You need to get out of here. Don't worry about me." Aang's eyes locked with his. He was just as stubborn and steady as any other earthbender, Aang realized. And determined. He wanted to help them in any way possible, and this was the way he felt was best. Aang nodded. "All right, let's get out of here," Toph said, strengthening her own wall, trying to ward off the turret blasts from above them. Zuko, with one parting look to Haru, jumped down to Appa, who had regained his bearings and floated near the ground. Sokka and Suki were next, reluctantly. Toph came after them, and only Aang, Katara, and Haru lingered. Katara held her hands together for a moment, and Aang could see the conflict in her eyes as she was torn between fighting alongside him or fleeing with the others. "Thank you," she finally said to him, giving him a kiss on the cheek. Haru blushed. Aang put a hand on Haru's shoulder. "Be careful," he said. "Don't, on us." Haru smiled. After everything, he still had a soft smile, full of warmth. "I won't." Aang and Katara gave one last farewell to their friend and jumped onto the bison. Aang blasted away the soldiers that neared, and thankfully Appa didn't need to be goaded into action. With a booming roar, the bison shook off the pain and flew away. Below them, Team Avatar, now once again reduced to 6, watched as Haru smashed the earth barrier down on all of the soldiers and the Dai Li, and then land on the ground and fight them all with a feat of earthbending that made even Toph proud. They never saw him again. Aang was, to put it simply, extremely annoyed. His wrists had completely swollen in pain from the rock cuffs which still held him in place. Zuko and Aang were still bound by the rocks put on them by Long Feng's Dai Li, but they were able to stretch their arms under their bent legs, putting the cuffs in front of them, making it a little more bearable. At the very least, they were able to feed themselves and do very basic things. The pain and annoyance was made even worse by the sweltering heat of the summer day in the Fire Nation. His clothes clung to his sweaty body and his face was turning red from the sun. It was nearly as hot as it was in the Si Wang Desert, and several times more humid. Azula, on the other hand, seemed to think it was quite funny. She snickered whenever Zuko moaned, and there was always a triumphant gleam in her eyes afterward. She was able to best the Dai Li with pure trickery, something that Aang or any of his previous friends weren't used to doing. Of course, they were accustomed to being on the receiving end of it, courtesy of their enemy Azula. Now, in his mind, Aang referred to this Azula as Nice Azula, and the one that he previously knew, the one that killed him, as Bad Azula. It was still odd to think of her as a friend now, but he still didn't fully trust her. It would take a lot of time for that to develop. His back quivered slightly, as if remembering an old wound, but there were no scars to speak of. Aang still remembered it quite vividly, the cosmic energy surging into him, flooding the boy with power, only to have it taken away a moment later, by the princess's lightning. That time, pain flooded into his body, exiting by the sole of his foot. He knew it wasn't the same Azula that was in front of him. But it was hard to lay down his guard completely to her, despite their burgeoning friendship. He would not yet be able to rely on her in battle, or when he needed help most. There was an underlying fear, there was always going to be one, he knew that she was going to turn on him again. And the next time, it might be for real. Trust was earned, but he wouldn't be able to explain to her why it was taking her so long to earn it. As the result of one very confusing stir of emotions, Aang felt helpless. Lately, his thoughts had been going into a full circle with no clear answer. He wanted the help of his friends again. He missed the old Zuko, one that grew to offer advice as invaluable as his uncle's. He missed the pillar of quiet, supportive strength. After the fateful day of the comet, they sparred each day, trying to outclass the other. Zuko was his silent, worthy, contemplative companion. He missed old Sokka's sarcastic wit and surprising intellect. The Water Tribe boy always had a plan of action, a way to get them out of their troubles. What he lacked in bending he made up in resourcefulness, and even Zuko looked to him with full respect. Aang had missed his ability to brighten up any situation, but in more recent days, his humor had grown dull with hopelessness. He missed Toph's biting sarcasm and blunt comfort. She was unconquerable, and often took the lead of the group when they were feeling particularly hopeless or depressed. She was always the first to take action, the first to beat their opponents' faces into the ground. Last of all, he missed Katara. His beautiful, strong, willful Katara. He felt a painful ache in his stomach as he thought of her, how much he missed her, how much he loved her. He needed her comfort. His eyes glistened as he thought about how he was never able to hold her in his arms, how he couldn't fully, truly express his feelings. The young woman was the one that held them all together. He wiped away the budding tears as he thought of the waterbender. He switched his thoughts back to Long Feng, not wanting to think of his friends. How did the earthbender gain control of the city? He didn't remember Jiduan from before. Did he build it himself? What had caused his falling out with the king of Ba Sing Se? Thinking of Long Feng made him think of how Azula used her brilliant acting to persuade Long Feng she was on his side, and thinking of that made Aang think of the confusing friendship with her all over again. He groaned. The whole thing made his head ache. What is that? Zuko suddenly asked, pointing downward with his rock cuffs. Aang and Azula looked over the furry edge of the bison. Aang's eyes widened. He could have sworn he was looking down on an Earth Kingdom village. It had ramshackle walls around it, very weathered and beaten by something, and stone buildings with shingled roofs. Some tents had been set up within the walls. Aang suddenly remembered that it might in fact be an Earth Kingdom town. Many war refugees had come to live in the Fire Nation. Did that mean they were under the rule of Long Feng? At the moment, Aang wasn't feeling particularly cautious. He wanted these cuffs off, and now. He never felt so helpless without his earthbending. "We're going," Aang said simply, pulling on the reins. The bison moaned and descended, landing at the base of a pair of mountains situated at the town's inland border. Zuko didn't object, perhaps understanding his reasons for wanting to go, and he looked just as eager to get the cuffs off. As they cautiously approached the town on foot, Aang noticed a pair of watchtowers sprouting from the mountainsides. Once Aang and the others walked around enough to get an angle to see between the mountains, he understood the purpose of the towers. His eyes widened upon the sight. Beyond the valley, he saw the bay, and from the ground level it looked like a sea of fire as the sun began to set under the horizon. Suddenly, it all made sense to him. The watchtowers were for waterbender attacks, and the weathered stone walls were from those assaults. Soldiers patrolled the walls, and he realized this was a garrison as much as it was a town, a military camp, and Long Feng's possible front against the Water Nation. From what he knew of both of the Long Fengs, neither of them would fight against the enemy actively, if there wasn't something in it for them, so this must have been a purely defensive outpost. Aang stored his findings away for later, turning back to the camp as Zuko and Azula continued to walk ahead of him. The dry, dead grass cracked under his feet as he walked. It had died recently. Was it because of the heat? Is it always this hot in the Fire Nation? Aang asked his companions. I don't remember it being like this. Are you having a drought? No, Zuko answered. He kicked at the dry grass, sending clumps of dirt into the air. This isn't because of a drought. See the grass among the mountainsides? Something else did this. Waterbenders, Azula hissed. This camp must have to withstand periodic attacks. I've heard a lot of villages are like this. Wait, they can absorb the moisture from the ground? He asked, surprised. In his world, to his knowledge, only the swamp benders, Hama and Katara were able to do that. Yes, most foot soldiers can. With little water available on land, they suck the ground dry. Usually you can tell where they have been by the ground and the plants, Zuko answered solemnly. They destroy our lands, he muttered. Uncle told us. You guys really don't like waterbenders, do you? Aang asked, frowning. I used to. I have great friends from the water tribes, he said. He still had Sokka and Katara, they weren't gone. He was going to see them again. They killed our mother, Azula said under her breath. Even though she had nothing to offer them. She was just a florist, and they dragged her out to the sea and drowned her. I'm sorry, Aang said, putting his head down. You must miss her. He knew loss perhaps better than anyone else. Do you have something of hers? Something to remember her by? He never had anything to keep from all those he missed. Only this stupid headpiece, Azula grumbled. Aang had noticed the twin-pronged flame headpiece in her raven-colored hair before, but he was so accustomed to seeing a similar one on Bad Azula that he didn't even question it previously. His eyes widened in surprise. Doesn't that sort of thing belong to royalty? Azula laughed. Yes, it did a long time ago. Now it's just sentimental junk, since according to Uncle a different bloodline from some ancient Fire Lord rules in the Golden City. But even that leader isn't called a Fire Lord these days, not like our great-grandfather would have been. I guess you could say we're descended from royalty, Zuko said with a shrug. Our father and ancestors would have been considered Fire Lords, if the war never happened. A couple hundred years ago our people lived in a dormant caldera, but battles between warlords ended up making our people migrate to the southern archipelago. Chills went up Aang's spine at the indirect mention of Ozai. My mother gave this to me, Azula said, hands reaching up to her headpiece. It glinted with reflected sunlight. Aang found himself interested in the turn of events that changed their family's history so much from what he knew. If you're descended from Saz, Aang cut himself off before he could finish the Fire Lord's name. He wasn't supposed to know the identity of their great-grandfather. Those Fire Lords on your father's side, how did your mom come to get that headpiece? A wedding gift, Zuko explained. But Azula failed to mention it was customarily supposed to go to me, the firstborn, not her. He gave his sister a sidelong glance full of irritation only siblings could have for each other, a look he recognized often from Sokka and Katara. Well, even when I was a little girl I had an appreciation for royal accoutrements, Azula said with a wave of her hand. I always thought it was made for me. Just like father did, which is why he had it instead of uncle, the elder brother. That means she threw a temper tantrum until mom let her have it, Zuko said, to which Azula surreptitiously tripped him. We shouldn't bore Aang any longer with our family history, said Azula, while Zuko simmered. Father just loved to drill us with those lessons about the family legacy and politics and all that. She deepened her voice and held up a clenched fist when she mentioned the family legacy, perhaps in mimicry of her father. Before we lost mother, anyway. And that was all she had to say about that. After a short walk to the stone walls, they were confronted by guards as they tried to get in the town, which Aang expected. It was a military camp, after all. Unfortunately for Aang and Zuko, neither of the two guards were earthbenders, and they were permitted to enter the town to search for one to remove their stone cuffs once they explained their situation, though they were careful not to mention it was because Long Feng had tried to capture them. So what should we do? Ask everyone if they're an earthbender. Azula asked as they passed through the gates. The place seemed almost like a regular town on the inside, albeit a rougher-looking one. Soldiers patrolled all over the place, and some younger trainees were being taught by older veterans. They all wielded weapons, and didn't seem to be earthbenders. Sabi, his lemur, cried pitifully in his hands. She, like Zuko and Aang, was still wrapped up in a stony grip. She hadn't been able to stretch her limbs for a full day now. Aang looked up at the sky as the day faded into night. They'd have to get free of their binds soon. Let's ask around, Aang agreed. Just as he was about to speak to a woman, the sound of a gong wailed through the town. Aang looked for the source of the noise, spotting it right above the gates they had just walked through. The watchman banged it again. The change was immediate. Every single person halted their playing or their training, picked up their weapons and armor, and rushed to the front gates. More people flooded out of buildings and tents, ready for battle. Aang, Zuko, and Azula were the only ones not moving, looking around in the sea of Earth Kingdom soldiers, completely confused. What's going on? Zuko asked, trying unsuccessfully to draw his broadswords despite his bound wrists. Robed men came out of one of the main buildings, followed by a bearded man. Aang immediately recognized the robed men as Dai Li. His eyes narrowed in suspicion, but he reminded himself that Long Feng had jurisdiction over this town. The bearded man looked very familiar to him, but he didn't get a good enough look to confirm his identity. They all started issuing orders. Men and women rolled out the catapults and ballistæ and loaded them. Earthbenders rolled massive boulders toward the walls, ignoring Aang and Zuko's pleas for assistance. Civilians, children included, ran for cover, vanishing into tents and buildings as war horns resounded from the bay, the water tribes answering the gong of alarm. Medics hurried the wounded soldiers that had been out and about back into tents while the trainees gathered up and dispersed all of the weapons they could. Someone tried to force a spear into Zuko's hands, not realizing when he couldn't grip it and it clattered to the ground. All of it happened so quickly and the battle began in earnest once the invading ships came close enough to shore. Massive grappling hooks crashed against the top of the wall, knocking down some of the watchmen, while harpoons pierced clean through the weakest parts of their defenses. Dai Li rushed to the scene, earthbending some of the hooks away before the unseen enemy could climb atop the walls. Some more stood at the base of the wall, punching into the stone, the effects of which were unseen to Aang, Zuko, and Azula. Soldiers pushed all three of them away as they lined up to reinforce their allies on the walls. "What are you kids doing?" one man growled to them. It was the same bearded man from before. "We came to get help." "What's going on?" Zuko asked him. When the man was closer, Aang was able to recognize who he was. He was Tyro, Haru's father. Sure enough, the earthbender Aang once knew well stepped up next to his father a moment later. He had changed significantly. The Haru that Aang knew was once a good-natured, sensitive young man, eager to make a difference in the world alongside his father. This Haru was battle-hardened and rough and rippling with muscle. He disregarded the Avatar and his friends, stepped in front of the soldiers congregated in front of the wall, and waited. "This is no place to find help, kid. We're right in the middle of a battle," Tyro said gruffly. "We know that. But if you're fighting against waterbenders, can we help?" Zuko asked. "We want to help. Get these rocks off of us." He shook his bound wrists, yelling above the cacophony around them. "Yeah. We've been expecting an attack from those monsters," Tyro growled. "Get to safety. This is no place for kids." He walked up next to his son. Zuko grit his teeth and shouted out in frustration. "I can't believe this. Can't we get these stupid things off?" He yelled hopelessly. The Daily standing at the base of the wall suddenly opened it outwards, and all of the soldiers, plus Haru and Tyro, rushed out to fight, shouting battle cries. "You heard him. We have to get away, we aren't safe here," Aang yelled to his friends. He turned around to head deeper into town, trying to find safety. He felt trapped. He hated being trapped, and the concept of an all-out battle had become foreign to him. These just never happened anymore in his world, when only small pockets of resistance had the strength to build up even the barest hint of a fight. Aang and his friends avoided direct conflict like this at all costs. The waterbenders outside blocked their escape, and Aang felt his pulse racing as he thought back to the dozens of other times he'd been stuck in a similar situation. If only they could get to Appa. "Oh, no. Appa's still out there," Aang shouted to Zuko and Azula, his voice high. Azula stopped ahead of him, apparently perfectly content to go in the opposite direction of the battle as well. "What can we do? Appa will be fine." Aang's stomach dropped and the familiar fear of losing Appa resurfaced. "I can't just leave him out there." He spotted an old woman beckoning to them, wanting the kids to go with her. "Go with that lady. She's probably got somewhere safe you guys can go." "What about you?" Zuko asked him, his brow furrowed. "I'm going to help Appa," he answered, tossing the screeching Sabi to Azula. Before they could protest further, he ran off toward the gates of the town, his hands still bound. He knew he was being stupid. There wasn't much he could do against numerous enemies with his hands bound. But Aang wasn't one to give up easily, even if this Appa wasn't his Appa. This wasn't his world. The stakes weren't as high here. Maybe, if something happened, he would just wake up. As soon as he was through the gates of the town again, his eyes saw destruction and war. They were not meeting for the first time. His eyes were accustomed to this. He still hated it, still ignored the gritty details and closed his eyes to the horrors, because if he dwelled on them he would have to stop fighting and stop running. He ran right through the battle, eyes focused on the bay he saw earlier, which now had 3 water navy ships docked in it. Men in blue leather armor tried to attack him, but he easily jumped over the swings and blasted them away with bursts of air from his feet. These men were very different than the ones under Sokka, almost murderous in their intensity and wielding weapons of iron in addition to whalebone and wood. One man he saw had a sword covered with gruesome spikes, like shark teeth. The airbender dodged to the side as water cut through the air where he was moments before. The waterbender rushed up to him, readying more water from his pouch. Aang noticed that he had ice wrapped around his wrists, neck, and legs, more ammunition if he required it. The warrior hurled ice spikes at him, but Aang deflected them with a well-timed gust of wind from his mouth. Before the man could retaliate, Aang ran up past him, knocking him out by hitting the warrior on the head with his earth cuffs. Aang smirked. He supposed they could be somewhat useful. As he neared the bay, he was surprised to see that the water navy ships were gleaming and silver, reflecting the sun's rays and nearly blinding him. He found it to be a large contrast to the normal, gunmetal black fire navy ships he was used to. He wondered why Sokka's ship was wooden. On closer inspection, he found these to be made of wood as well, but these juggernauts had been coated in ice that appeared like silver in the light. The parts of the ship not covered in ice had been coated in a slick type of oil that repelled flame when the Earthbender battalion shot missiles covered in burning pitch from their ballistae. Some ships in the fleet had a different design altogether, lower decks with most of the ship underwater and a rear command tower that made him think the whole thing looked like a partially submerged whale. Where the Fire Nation had used coal-powered ships, these ships propelled with sails in waterbending. Flaming javelins don't work, Captain. We discovered that last time. Tyro bellowed. He ducked behind a hastily constructed shelter. Aang heard a loud, familiar growl, and looked up into the sky for its source. Appa! He called out. The bison flew overhead, dodging the harpoon shots which were aiming for him from the water navy. Aang glared in their direction, but called to his bison again. Appa, get down here. Appa heard and answered his call, and when he was low enough, Aang hopped on his back. He looked to the ships. One of them had stopped firing, moored on the beach. There seemed to be a disturbance on board and Aang sped forward, determined to help. They had nearly shot down Appa. Aang snapped the reins, urging his bison on. Come on, Appa. We're going to fight. He shouted to his friend over the roar of the wind. The bison growled in response, and moments later landed on the deck of the ship, smacking one of the harpoon launchers away with his tail. The disturbance on board had been caused by a gang of earthbenders with Haru in the lead, issuing orders to them just like his father did earlier. Aang met them on the deck, slick with ice, as several warriors emerged from below. Let me deal with them, Aang said to Haru. Get your soldiers out of here. The earthbender didn't budge, his face impassive. Forget it. There's no way I'm letting you fight all of them alone, Haru said. He seemed much more mature to Aang and accustomed to leadership. The other soldiers all looked up to him. Aang nodded, remembering his dream, and hopped off of his bison. This time he'd let nothing happen to Haru. First, get rid of these for me, Aang said, holding up his bound wrists. With one quick movement, they crumbled to dust, and Aang flexed his sore wrists. He got into a bending stance while Haru held his warhammers forward. They faced the group of half a dozen soldiers as Haru's few remaining survivors also readied themselves for battle. Aang's motions were quick and fluid as he tried not to slip on the ice coating the ship, staying mobile to prevent his feet being frozen in place. He cut out at the soldiers with small arcs of air from his hands, easily dodging each of their blows and knocking them down with an air-powered kick to the face. Two waterbenders tried attacking him at once, but the Avatar held out his palm and started the air circling around him, making a barrier of wind. He used it to repel the soldiers around him. Their bone and shell shields did nothing to defend them against an airbender, which repelled even their bolas and boomerangs. Haru was a fighting force by himself. He swept his hammers outward, toppling two of his enemies, their leather armor useless against his onslaught. His own 3 soldiers behind him did nothing but watch Aang and Haru as they dominated over their foes. The earthbender slammed his hammer into each harpoon launcher, one at a time, destroying them all. Aang blasted the blade boomerangs from other ships out of the air. Haru and his 3 earthbenders leapt off of the ship to the rocky beach, pulling up earthen spikes that pierced the ship's hull, capsizing it. Ready for the next one? Aang asked Haru with a smirk. The battle was over by the time Aang, Haru, and the other soldiers returned to the town. It had been won, but it was a costly victory, and the waterbenders' retreat had been as swift as the tides. Aang tried not to look at the blood and worse things strewn around the battleground. Even after all this time he scarcely had the stomach for the terrible things found after a battle. Aang was contemplative as they silently walked back to the town. Just like Iroh, Zuko, Azula, Mai, and Long Feng, Haru did not know him. He didn't expect him to. This Haru was so different. Haru watched Appa as he flew above them, the only one staying out of the blood and violence. Luckily, the town was not too damaged. The walls needed repairs, but Aang knew they were used to doing this frequently. As he observed the damage done to the walls, a voice pulled him out of his thoughts. You're all right. Aang turned, spotting Azula leaning against one of the walls, a now freed Sabi stretching her limbs out on her shoulders. Her clothing had been scuffed and torn in some places and she was covered in dust and mud. Aang didn't speak. That was really foolish, Azula said. But I'm glad you're unharmed. Thanks for caring, Aang said with a tired grin. His whole body felt sore already from all the fighting and he didn't realize his old body had been so out of shape, so unused to battle. Can you please get these things off of me? Aang and Azula turned to the voice, which was Zuko going around and begging to get his earth cuffs off. None of the earthbenders listened, too busy with their work reinforcing the walls. Azula snickered at him. "Hey, kid," Haru said to Aang, putting a hand on his shoulder. "My dad would want to meet you. Without you, I don't know if our mission would have succeeded." "Don't call me kid," Aang said, but even so, he smiled. "I'm the Avatar. My name is Aang." Haru gave him a sheepish grin. "Oh, sorry. But will you come? You were amazing out there and we have to offer our thanks." "Sure," he replied. "But as long as they come with me," he added, gesturing to Zuko and Azula. "Of course." Aang nodded to Azula and he followed after Haru. Azula trailed after him, pulling her brother along by pinching him on the arm. The three were led to the main building in the back of the town, the same one that Aang saw Haru and Tyro emerging from earlier. Inside of the building was a single war room, occupied by a large table covered in maps and other documents. Tyro sat at the head of the table, surrounded by Dai Li agents. He looked distinctly uncomfortable, but unharmed. "So, you're the Avatar," Tyro said to him. "These Dai Li agents just told me about you, and what happened in Jiduan, but I'm not going to let them take you into custody on my watch. Not after what you've just done here. I am Tyro, Haru's father, and leader of the coalition." "The coalition?" Aang asked, his brow rising in confusion. "We are a legion of earthbenders dedicated to fighting against the encroaching waterbenders from the south," Tyro explained to him, chest puffed with pride. "We're a Jiduan colony that fights under Long Feng. Why are you fighting them here and not in the Earth Kingdom?" Aang asked. Tyro sighed and Haru averted his eyes. "Originally, our village was in the Earth Kingdom, but we fled here for a safe haven that King Longfeng promised us. Instead, we found that we were chased by the war, and decided to stand our ground and fight back. We've been defending the Fire Nation coasts from their attacks ever since," Tyro explained. "The loss of many of our own inspired us to fight." "That was when they took my mother away," Haru muttered, his arms crossed. "She's still out there somewhere, living a life of servitude. But we'd like to thank you for helping us," Tyro said, quickly changing the subject. "Without you, this battle would have ended differently. We didn't expect a daytime attack, and they took our lowered defenses to their advantage." He bowed in respect to Aang. "We'd also like to thank this young lady also," Tyro added, smiling to Azula and bowing. "She used some impressive fire-bending back there." Zuko turned to Azula in anger, who stared back at him, unflinching. "Are you crazy? You could have gotten yourself killed." "You're too inexperienced for battle," Aang said, frowning. She rounded on him. "I'm too inexperienced? What about you? Aren't you supposed to be a pacifist monk? And you're the one who's been sitting all cozy in that firestone for 100 years. She retorted. "Neither of you have any place to reprimand me. You would have done the same if you could, Zuko. Don't pretend otherwise." Tyro and Haru looked between them, eyes wide with awkward surprise. Clearly neither of them expected these outbursts from their words of thanks. Aang felt the familiar guilt weigh on his chest, the reminder that he had run away and failed the world for 100 years. Even here, that guilt followed him. He couldn't meet her eyes, but that was when he noticed that her hair had come undone, headpiece missing. He wondered if she lost it in the battle. Before he could say anything about it, she spun on her heel and left the command tent. "Zuko, let's go." "We're leaving," Aang said to his friend, eyes downcast. "We were glad to help," he added to Haru and Tyro. "Stay a little longer and rest," Tyro said, extending his arms in a placating gesture. "It is no common feat for children as young as yourselves to be involved in a battle such as this one. It's the least we can do. It's okay." "Thanks for the offer," Aang said, walking out of the building. He looked one last time at Haru, hoping his friend would find his peace one day. Or maybe this Haru would be strong enough to claim it on his own. "Goodbye, Avatar," said Haru. Despite being more of a soldier than the Haru Aang knew, he had that same smile. Hopeful, and a little sad. "Maybe we'll meet again one day." Zuko paused and held up his wrists to the earthbenders, still bound in earthen cuffs. "Can you get these off, please?" Bato's eyes observed the damage wrought unto the Fire Nation lands. His sleek, rimy ship docked in a different bay far enough up the coast so that the coalition's camp was still visible, but close enough for the damaged ships to limp without capsizing. His ship stayed away from the battle and offered support from a distance, just in case something like this would happen. He liked to think himself cleverer than the rest of the warriors who charged into a battle without a care in the world, only interested in gaining glory for their tribe. Though this had been a defeat, he felt confident that his forces would wear down their defenses soon enough. Like waves crashing against the shore, his people were relentless. The coalition and the Fire Nation as a whole would only hold out for so long. He, of course, was clean and untouched from the battle, for he played no part in it except to command. He waited patiently as his soldiers gathered the dead and wounded, burying those gone and carrying the wounded onto the sole remaining ship. At least 2 whole ships with their crews had been captured, but he pushed that concern from his mind for the moment. His eyes caught on a glint of gold clutched in a wounded man's hand, perhaps a treasure claimed from the battle. The wounded man teetered in and out of consciousness, mumbling of newfound riches, but Bato ignored his delirium and wrenched it from his grip. He wiped it clean of its mud and grime on the warrior's own leathers, who was barely cognizant of the fact that it had been taken from him, and Bato examined it with a critical eye. If he was correct, the piece of gold was an ornate headpiece of the ancient, royal line of fire. It was perfect. One of Sokka's interrogated men mentioned a girl traveling with the Avatar that wore one of these, and it could only belong to her. Bato smirked and pocketed it, plans formulating in his mind. Chapter 7, The Spirit World, Summer Solstice, Part 1. The comet streamed high above them, leaving a tail of fire behind it. Aang, his friends, and all of their warriors looked up at it with a grim look of foreboding. They didn't win the battle in time. The Fire Nation forces would be striking back any moment now. Aang and Zuko were the ones who went to fight Fire Lord Ozai together. Unfortunately, Ozai had foreseen the resistance to his invasion on the Earth Kingdom and had many defenses planned, including a full platoon of royal guards with him at all times. Aang had finally caught his first glimpse of the ruthless tyrant in person, but the Fire Lord slipped away as more royal guards came to fill his place so he could continue his immolation. Aang and Zuko had wasted much time and energy fighting them off, and they were forced to retreat or face their deaths. Aang wasn't able to go into the Avatar state because of his locked chakras then. His thoughts were immediately forgotten, for when Aang and Zuko returned to the battlefield to retreat, his friends and the combined force of the Earth Kingdom remnants and Iroha's secret society were winning against the Fire Nation soldiers. Everything was going smoothly until the arrival of Sozin's comet, turning the sky red in its power. Aang, Zuko, and all of the other firebenders there felt the power coursing through them, but the enemy soldiers were able to turn the tides first. Friends around him fell to the onslaught. Master Pakka was bested by a dozen firebenders' simultaneous blasts. Che, a strengthened firebender, exploded when his own bombs caught fire. Katara and Sokka were losing hope. They had learned earlier that Azula and Ozai had their father and the first invasion force executed. Suki, freed from prison, was fighting valiantly, but she was the first to organize the retreat. Zhangjiang's firebenders stayed behind to hold the enemies off, but the master firebender himself was the last to fall in a spectacular feat of flames. And yet, Aang pursued the Fire Lord and the Phoenix King. The day of Sozin's comet was the worst day of his life. Ozai had succeeded in ending his enemies in fire and smoke, all hope extinguished. Aang was struck with a sense of déjà vu as the bison flew over the dirty, polluted river. The sun was hanging high in the sky, just past its zenith for the day. The group was hot, tired, and especially hungry after a full day of flying. Aang found himself surprised that Appa didn't fall into the dirty water beneath them. Azula, as she usually did when she was bored, tossed a ball of fire up and down in her hand. Occasionally, she'd let out a tired sigh as if trying to communicate her boredom. Well, if she wants to be entertained, Aang thought, it won't be me doing the entertaining. After leaving the coalition's encampment, Azula had realized that she had lost her prized golden headpiece, and since then, her attitude had become sour. Despite her somewhat flippant attitude toward her family life, he could see how much their mother's loss had affected her. It made Aang wonder what she thought of her mother in his world. Zuko had never told him. Zuko was silent. Almost broody, even. Aang was reminded of the Zuko he knew well, and he found himself starting to blur the two of them together in his head. That helped to settle one dull ache. It was starting to feel a little like he had his old friend back. Katara. Sokka. Toph. I need you, he thought sadly, his eyes drawn to the streaks of orange light reflected from the sunset. His friends still felt like holes inside of his heart. A light weight on his head shook him from his thoughts, and Sabi the lemur chittered in his ears. Her long, bushy tail swept around his head of growing hair. And I miss Momo, too. He laughed, taking the lemur off of his head and petting her. Still, Sabi wasn't bad. She was much more affectionate than her counterpart ever was. Appa groaned with tiredness, but he seemed reluctant to land in the dirty water. It's okay, buddy. It doesn't seem that bad, Aang comforted him, hanging over the side of the bison's head. He inspected the water closely and even saw streaks of a brilliant red color that made him think of blood with alarm. Actually, just fly higher, Aang told him uneasily. The water was cloudy and dirty, and there were many floating fish at the surface of the water. He wondered if the vermilion substance had something to do with that. That's gross, Azula said, scrunching her nose. It reeks of rotten fish and eggs. Well, that's pretty much what this river's full of, Aang said. Well, except for eggs. I wonder what happened. The water's poisoned, Zuko said, taking his turn to inspect the pollution. We should try to find the cause of all of this. Sooner or later, it will affect everything around it. Or everything else in it, Aang said, looking ahead of them. Look. The dirty, ugly river widened, and right in the middle of it was a series of interconnected wooden docks, inlaid with wooden houses on stilts. A floating village with thatched roofs and rowboats situated at the river's junction. Aang squeezed the bridge of his nose. Not this place. It looks like some sort of a fishing village, Zuko pointed out. Azula snorted. I wonder how successful that venture is, she said, bitingly sarcastic as usual. Great observation, Zuzu. Azula, just be quiet for a minute, Aang said, rubbing his temples. Azula crossed her arms and turned away, huffing. Neither of them noticed her shooting dark glares at their backs. I know this place. But a Fire Nation factory was the cause of the polluted water before, what is it this time? He wondered. Since Appa couldn't land in the water or on the rickety dock, Aang landed his bison off on the shore across from the town. He saw a tiny hut next to them, where Aang pointedly remembered an odd man ferrying them across the river. Sure enough, a bony, balding man waved to get their attention. Hey! Need a ride across the river? Last one for today. He yelled out. Azula leaned over the saddle, scrutinizing the old man with something like perplexity. So did you completely miss the flying bison that we're riding? Not at all. The old man replied with a toothy grin. But riding my ferry is more of an authentic, sleepy fishing village experience. So are we going? Zuko asked Aang, apparently accepting that as an answer. Yeah, I want to see what's going on, Aang replied, steering Appa toward the shore. He would be too heavy to stand on the docks, anyway. This place reeks of mystery, and fish. He hopped off of the bison, patting the side of Appa's head. You stay here, he said. Sabi, previously clinging to the top of his head, wrapped around one of Appa's horns. You watch Appa, Sabi, he added. I don't really want to come. This seems like a waste of time, Azula said. Zuko ignored her and climbed off the saddle. Then don't, Aang said offhandedly, walking down the slope toward the ferry boat. Azula scowled and he thought she might stomp her foot in petulant anger, but she held back. Fine, I'll come. I just don't want to be bored to death, she said, following after them and muttering under her breath. By the time the three walked down the short, dirt path to the ferry dock, the old man was packed up and ready to go. Hello, my name's Doc. Aang nearly slapped his forehead. As soon as he heard the name, he remembered everything about the man. He very dearly hoped he wouldn't run into the same frustrations as last time. Hey, those are funny markings on your head. I've seen spirits with funny facial markings, just like our very own ex-protector spirit. Is that arrow pointing somewhere? To the ground, right? To represent the earth. And it's blue, so I bet my brother would say you're a waterbender, too. Doc pointed to Aang's tattoo, his words coming out rapid fire. He kicked the boat away from the dock after they all clambered in. Before Aang could say otherwise, Doc continued. But you don't seem like those other waterbenders I've seen before, which means you're a nice one, like the last Avatar 100 years ago. So you're the Avatar, aren't you? They all looked at each other until Azula crossed her arms. Well, he is right. But for all the wrong reasons. How did he even do that? Yeah. My name's Aang, he said with a forced smile of greeting. That's just great. We could really use your help. Doc said happily, grinning at them again as he rowed. He didn't seem to hear Azula. Yeah, I've noticed, Aang said, letting out a sigh. But what happened to the river? Did your village do this? Zuko asked, leaning over the side of the boat. Now that they were much closer, he started to look a little green. No, not at all. It was the Water Nation. Doc said. They have a laboratory not far from here, and they're dumping their wastes from their experiments into the water and polluting our air. A laboratory? Aang asked. What's that? Azula rapped him on the head with her knuckles. Wow, you really missed a lot living in that rock for the past 100 years, she said, a delighted smirk twisting her lips. She loved to know more things than him and took advantage of it whenever she could, but that tendency didn't test his patience yet. He was just glad she didn't hold that knowledge close. Or were you always like that? Aang rubbed his head, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. Yeah, that tends to happen if you've been cut off from the world, he said, scowling. He turned back to Doc. We don't really know too much, but the waterbenders are doing all different kinds of secret alchemical experiments in there. Whatever it is, it's making our painted lady mad, Doc explained, paddling slowly to the village. The painted lady? Aang asked. Katara? Yes, she's the river spirit, the man informed them. Most of us used to respect her, but she started to destroy parts of our village and take people away. The painted lady did that? Aang asked, gaping. Yes, so we need your help. Who better than the Avatar to solve spirit world troubles? Doc asked. You're just in time, too. The summer solstice is approaching. The summer solstice? Zuko asked. So? Each solstice, the spirit world and our world come closer and closer to touching, until there's really no line between them at all. Doc answered. We don't know what'll happen then. And for no reason at all, Doc began laughing. Azula shared an uncomfortable glance with Aang and Zuko. What a kooky old man. Oh. The Fire Nation lands are so hot, Kunna said, reclining in the ice pool she had made herself. Prince Sokka, you should make one for yourself. It is a nice weapon against the heat, she said to her grandson. The old woman relaxed in a small clearing in the willow forest, resting from their long journey of searching for the Avatar's trail. In between Sokka's extensive training and their endless search, the old waterbender was tired. Sokka's back was turned to her as he spoke. I don't need any cold water baths. What we need to do is find the Avatar and make me stronger, he replied, rolling his eye. But, maybe not in that order. Kunna let out a low, sleepy moan. Oh, but we've searched so long already. Sokka turned around in anger. You're so frustrating. Come back to the ship in an hour, or we're leaving. Turn around. Kunna shouted at him. Give an old woman some dignity. Sokka covered his eye and rushed off, suddenly feeling very sick. So do you have any idea what you're doing? Azula asked Aang as they waited for the sun to set fully. Somewhat, the Avatar replied. He stood near a pile of netting tangled with muck from the river and a box full of raw oysters that smelled so foul they stung his nose. He sidled away from the oysters, grimacing. I've worked with spirits before. I know what to do. In his movement to get away from the oysters, he accidentally kicked over a bucket full of chum that smelled even more rotten. Azula didn't look convinced. Everyone get inside, the sun's setting. Doc yelled out to the villagers. Well, see you later, Aang said to Azula, shrugging. He turned to face the water and began to wait. Angela frowned, but didn't move. She looked at the emaciated villagers with something like pity as they hurried indoors, but on her it even looked a little like disgust. Ain had a hard time discerning it. He wondered if she really did look down on them, or if she even had any desire to help them at all. Like Katara had helped them, once. "Come on, Zula," Zuko said, walking up to the two. The sky darkened into night and most of the villagers had gone inside at this point. She still didn't move. "Angela." "What?" She snapped at him. "Hurry up, we have to go." Zuko urged her. She put a hand on her hip. "Why can't I help? You've had this annoying tendency of trying to leave me behind or away from the battles, but I think I've proven by now that I can handle myself," she said. "Is this about trying to prove you're strong, or is it about helping the people who need you?" Aang asked without looking at her. "I know you're strong, Angela. And crafty. But dealing with spirits is something completely different." She huffed. "I don't see why it can't be a bit of both." "We don't know anything about spirits, Angela," said Zuko, his voice low. "Kman." Aang turned to them, seeing the older boy's scarless face creased with worry for his younger sister. "Angela, go. It's too dangerous for you," Aang said. "You heard Doc, the painted lady has been taking people away." "Doc, don't close those doors yet." "Hey, it's his brother Su now. Doc is inside." The old man yelled out, ready to close the doors. Aang rolled his eyes. It was the same person again. "Well, you heard Su. Get out of here." Zuko started to pull Angela along, and she reluctantly acquiesced without another word of protest. With that minor problem handled, Aang turned back to the water and took a deep breath, waiting. The dark waters were still as the night grew cold, and a heavy fog descended over the village. He could still see the streaks of red in the water, like spilled paint dancing on the surface. Zuko and Angela were not quite inside of the building yet when a little boy stuck his head out the window, his head of unruly brown hair bouncing. "She's coming," he whispered, his voice edged with excitement. At that point, Angela stopped and looked back toward Aang, the wooden boards creaking beneath her feet. "We can't just leave him," she said to her brother. "He doesn't know what he's doing. I think he's bluffing." Zuko put a hand on her shoulder. "You heard him and Su. There's nothing we can do. Get inside, quickly." The loony old man urged them. "It's the Avatar's job, and he's the only one who can do it. He is the bridge between our worlds." Angela didn't care about that. Aang didn't have a plan, that much she knew. He was right in that she was out of her depth regarding spirits, but wrong regarding her reasons for standing alongside him. She saw the way he looked at her as they arrived at the village, saw the disapproval in his eyes when a child approached her asking for food and she brushed him off without an apology. She had nothing to give, but it was as if Aang had expected her to offer comforting words, like he did after she had dismissed the child. But she didn't see the point in empty words, in pitying and patronizing the boy. Her village had scarcely more than these people did, and she hated when they had the rare visitor as well, because they always tried to patronize. They'd make a show of giving charity to her village in an attempt to curry favor with her father or the spirits. It was never genuine. These people deserved better. Angela had to find the cause of all this, but that meant knowing how spirits operated. What they wanted. She waited inside with Zuko but didn't shutter the window. Instead, Angela watched. Back at the end of the docks, Aang patiently awaited the arrival of the river spirit. He was not going to put his guard down like last time with Heibai and get attacked from behind. It occurred to him then that this was another parallel to an event in his world, eerily similar to the events surrounding the forest spirit. If he remembered correctly, that was during a solstice, too. Near where the river split, over the top of the water, he saw her fade into existence. Kunna laid her head back against the edge of the pool, taking a deep breath of relaxation as the ice soothed the back of her neck. Why couldn't her grandson Sokka learn to appreciate these kinds of things? The cold dip was refreshing in the hot Fire Nation air. Why was he always so hurried? He always planned things ahead, always only had one goal in mind. She'd been impressed by his creative schemes on more than one occasion, but he never stopped to take a break. Except to flirt with the young women in the nearest town. She couldn't believe that boy sometimes. With pretty women around him, his mood always changed for the better, even if he only wore it like a mask. It was nice for him, though. She did not want her dear grandson to become so possessed by his goals. She was interrupted from her thoughts by a deep rumbling all around her. She opened up one eye, but she didn't see anything. As she was about to sit up and take a look around, the ground rumbled again and rocks came up all around her, holding her in place. That's not just an ordinary water tribe woman, men, the Earth Kingdom soldier said, stepping from behind the curtain of willow branches. She's one of their elders. Kunna frowned, her eyes flicking back and forth between her captors, gauging their numbers. Leave me alone, if you know what's good for you. Forget it, the captain said. You're too valuable of a captive to pass this chance up. Can't help but wonder what you're doing so far from home. Men, grab her. She was having none of that. Don't touch me. She yelled hoarsely to the two soldiers as they stepped up to take her. I know about you soldiers and your longing for a woman's touch. The cold nights spent away from your wives, the loneliness. Get away from me. Perverts. Ma'am, please, one of the soldiers begged fearfully. None of us are thinking that. I'm naked. She shrieked. Inwardly, she grinned like a demon. Here, take your clothes. Another stuttering soldier said, handing her the robes and underclothes hanging on a tree branch. She snatched them out of his hand, covering herself up. All of you turn around now. She ordered them. Sokka wandered into the clearing, frustration written all over his face. Where was that old woman? He told her to be back to the ship a long time ago. He hoped she didn't drown in her ice pool or something. A couple of his warriors followed him. I don't see her anywhere, sir, one of them said, kneeling down to search for tracks. What happened? What are these rocks? The other asked. Was it a landslide? No. These were caused by earthbenders, probably from Jiduan, Sokka said, joining the warrior who searched for clues. He didn't see any sign of a scuffle aside from the earthbending that broke his grandmother's rapidly melting ice pool, but he spotted tracks in the soft earth leading off to a path between the willow trees. I think they took my gran away. For a quick moment, his heart skipped a beat. There she was, gently gliding across the water. Her wide hat and thin veil hid her face, giving her a mysterious quality that made her beautiful, in her own way. It was painful to watch her, because she reminded him so achingly of Katara. She was the closest thing he had seen to Katara ever since journeying to the spirit world. He had the childish desire to see her true face, just to make sure. His mind entertained the thought that it was Katara under the guise of the spirit woman again and that they'd be reunited. The painted lady raised one slim hand, her long sleeves hanging down so that they almost touched the water. The dirty river underneath her shot forward, off to the side of Aang, destroying part of the wooden dock. Aang covered his face with his hands, protecting himself from the flying splinters of wood. Aang intercepted her next attack by swinging his staff at the raging water, causing the torrent to lose its momentum. The spirit, or perhaps Katara, had previously ignored him. Now, the water spiraled at him, but an air barrier splashed the water to all sides. He was about to dart over to her when she raised both of her hands into the air, lifting her face to stare at him emotionlessly. Aang almost faltered, disappointment growing inside of him. She wasn't Katara. He had to remind himself that he was alone in this world. A wave that towered over her head formed at her beck and call, threatening to wash over the part of the village where Aang stood. Aang's brow furrowed as he dropped his staff and jumped into the air, gripping the air currents in his hands. He waved his arms to let the winds become more intense, clashing with the water wave and throwing it back. Aang fell gently to the wooden surface again with a deep breath, getting into a stance. He could not falter now. He needs our help. Azula argued with her brother. I want to fight. I can't just stand here and watch him. He's doing fine, Zuko said, gripping her shoulder to prevent her from moving. Now, we have to get inside. Who knows what that spirit could do? Azula shook herself free of her brother's grasp. Fine, you be a coward. And before he could stop her, the young firebender ran to the Avatar's aid. Aang had his staff in his hand again as he jumped to the side to dodge the spike of ice that erupted from under him, destroying the wood in another splintery explosion. The Painted Lady's movements were all graceful, but her attacks were disastrous. A sharp arc of water cut out at one of the support beams, sending the platform Aang was on and part of a house into the water. Dirty water flooded around his shoes, seeping into them. He was unable to express his annoyance as he dodged another attack from the Painted Lady. She seemed to be switching between attacking him and the village. As soon as he jumped over the attack, he saw her preparing another one. He was thinking about what to do next when a small arc of fire rushed out at her, pushing her back slightly with the force. Aang looked behind him after he regained his bearings to see Azula landing on the dock, recovering from her kick. She looked up at him. "Seems like you needed help, Avatar," she said with a smirk. The next thing they knew, the Painted Lady was among the wooden village in a swirl of mist, tearing parts of it down with tendrils of water. A wall of water shot out from under one of the docks, cutting Aang and Azula off from the rest of the village. A wave picked up around them, and the Painted Lady pushed them away. Aang jumped after her with an almost feral frustration, slamming his staff down on the docks around her and destroying parts of the village himself with a torrent of wind. The spirit put her arms up to defend her face, her robes and veil rippling as her hat threatened to fall off her head. When the winds died, she sent a stream of water Aang's way and quickly withdrew, running across the water and barely causing a disturbance on it. Azula, trying to regain her balance on the quickly sinking piece of wood, fell on her bottom rather ungracefully as the water snatched her out from under her feet. The polluted, smelly water snaked around her limbs, dragging her after the Painted Lady. Azula shouted, a wordless exclamation of panic that made Aang's heart drop with fear. Before doing anything else, Aang unfurled his glider and took chase after the two. He willed the winds behind him to move faster in order to propel himself and rescue Azula. He was quickly and easily reminded of a similar experience with a different spirit and a different friend, which only fueled his desire to rescue her further. Unfortunately, the Painted Lady was unusually fast, and to his horror, Azula seemed to be sinking into the water. She flailed against it but refused to scream. Instead, she tried blasting the water with fire, but it wasn't doing any good. "Azula! Grab my hand!" Aang shouted to her, flying low enough to get her. His hand stretched out towards her, and she gave up her fire-bending effort to take it. Her pale hand stretched to him. Closer, just a bit closer. For the first time, he was able to see the desperation and the fear in her face, and he knew he had to save her. He put on one last burst of speed, and she was nearly in his grasp. When she sunk into the water's clutches and the Painted Lady's figure disappeared. Startled, Aang was unable to stop himself from crashing into the water where he hit something hard and rolled, somehow, to dry land face first. Grumbling, he picked his wet body up off of the ground. He looked in front of him, surprised to see a statue of the Painted Lady he was just chasing. He turned around, and he was startled to see several round rocks arranged in a circle, in which he was the center of. Realizing what happened, Aang quivered with frustration. "No!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. He was just so angry. He was furious at the war, the spirit world, and himself. But most importantly, he was angry at his inability to do anything, to change the way things were happening. All of his mistakes were being replayed and he could do nothing about it. What was the purpose of dumping him in this world when he couldn't change the outcomes? Whatever it was, he sure was screwing up his opportunity for a second chance. Sokka followed the Earth Kingdom soldiers' trails on the back of his buffalo yak, following after his grandmother alone. He ordered his soldiers to remain with the ship as he searched. He nearly stepped on it before he noticed it on the ground, his grandmother's betrothal necklace. He often wondered why she kept it all these years, long after her husband was dead. The blue pendant was warm in his hands. Kunna had left it so he could follow, and the warmth signified that he was close. He was relieved. As soon as he had her back, he could resume his search for the Avatar. Coincidentally, at that moment, the Avatar's bison sailed through the night sky, not far above him. Sokka narrowed his blue eye at it. Why was the Avatar flying so low to the ground? Were they searching for a place to camp? He looked closer, but was mildly surprised to see not the Avatar, but the inexperienced swordsman friend on the head of the bison, searching for something. Sokka sensed the opportunity. Was the Avatar missing? Could he be in these very woods that were all around him? He clenched his fist and remembered the warm blue necklace in his hand. No, his grandmother was more important. Sitting there, Aang sort of figured out what was supposed to happen next. Last time, he remembered Fang, Roku's dragon, coming to him. As soon as he thought about that, he sat up, alarmed. Last time, Fang came so Roku could tell him something very crucial, the deciding factor of the war. Sozin's comet. What about now? What sort of nasty truth awaited him? It wasn't like Sozin's comet could arrive again, could it? It would empower the firebenders. That's a good thing, isn't it? He thought. The firebenders were on the good side now. Would Fang even come this time? But then he remembered something different. In this world, everything was reversed. The order he had to learn the elements, the seasons, and even the avatar cycle. That meant that a water-bending avatar came before him, and not Roku. He wondered if it would be Kuruk, or someone he never met. There was no way to be sure. He wasn't even sure if an animal guide would visit him this time. Aang sighed again in frustration. He debated whether or not to leave the small island that the painted lady led him to, with her own statue in the middle of it. Behind her, there were some reeds growing rampant, but the island was completely surrounded by dirty water. He sat in the middle of the circle of stones with his knees folded against the rest of his body, almost like a cold, frightened child. Frowning, he stood up. He figured he'd try to get back to Zuko in the village, so they could figure out what to do. He didn't even know how he'd get there in the first place, since he was unable to bend. After screaming earlier, he was able to work out that he was a spirit stuck in the mortal plane again. He stayed in his spirit form even though his body was carefully seated next to him just in case some kind of animal guide did come. He was debating whether or not to step back into his body when he saw a blue glow in the distance. It definitely wasn't a dragon, he could tell that much. It was much smaller, but still quite a large animal. It bounded to him across the water, stepping above it like it wasn't even there. Like most spirits in the mortal world, it was transparent and blue. It was a wolf, and quite a large one. It sped towards him without slowing down. The large animal barreled him over before he could move, its heavy paws on his chest. Aang looked almost fearfully into its maw of sharp teeth, and he began to wonder if he could die as a spirit, or if he was somehow lost in the spirit world and it came to retrieve him and take him away forever, or back home. Before he could finish his list of things that could happen to him, the animal slobbered all over his face, licking every bit of it that he could find. Hey! Hey, stop! Aang laughed, trying to push the wolf away. It stepped back, almost as if it was smiling to itself. Aang jumped to his feet. Immediately, he widened his eyes. This wolf was huge, a lot bigger than he previously thought. Standing on 4 legs, the spirit creature reached Aang's neck in height, and the rest of his body was wide and rippling with muscle. Are you Avatar Kuruk's animal guide? He asked the wolf. It yelped in response and crouched down, almost as if it wanted to play. The wagging of his tail made Aang laugh and the spirit lunged at his hand to gently nip and drag him onto its back as if he weighed no more than a feather. The wolf barely stirred Aang as it moved, leaping and bounding across rivers and mountains as it made its way far to the south. Kunna grinned to herself after she spotted a tiny puddle of water on the side of the road. The Earth Kingdom troops led her through a wooded area, probably to bring her to King Longfang of Jiduan. She had no interest in going there, so she planned her escape. She pulled a single drop of water from the puddle and used it to cut at her metal shackles every time her captors turned away, using only her fingers to manipulate the water. So, one of the soldiers began. What is a water tribe elder doing so far from home? You're a healer, aren't you? Why do you want to know, you rude, dirty little boy? She asked him. Her tone was accusing. Her eyes darted to their corners to see his reaction. The soldier fumed. Well, you're just lucky we don't deal with you right now, you annoying old hag. He yelled at her. Don't get so smart with us. We know water tribe women aren't trained to fight. Kunna cackled to herself. Oh, those ignorant young fools. Her laughter immediately stopped as she looked up at the sky, surprised. A spirit sped past a spirit wolf, with a young boy riding on its back. Are there any water tribe shamans around? She wondered. The wolf almost seemed to be flying. I beg to differ, she said to the soldiers. They numbered half a dozen, but she felt certain she could take them. She pulled her wrists apart, snapping the damaged metal chain. She thanked Sedna for the swampy ground and moist air of the Fire Nation as she caught the startled officer with a surprise attack. Get her! Another one of the soldiers shouted. The inexperienced recruits pulled boulders from the ground, but with agility belying her true age, Kunna dodged out of the way. She smacked the other soldier's ostrich horse on the flank with a whip of water, sending it speeding away with the screaming man on top of it. Another one sent a hailstorm of rocks at her, but she summoned a thin stream of water to circle in front of her and redirect the attack harmlessly, and then she whirled around and sent the water stream into the face of a fourth soldier, knocking him backwards. There were 3 left for her to deal with. Something whizzed through the air behind her, striking one of the soldiers and pinning him to the ground by his uniform icicles. Nice of you to join me, grandson, Kunna said to Sokka, who hurled his boomerang at another soldier. I can't believe you let them capture you, Gran, he said to her, a shadow of a grin on his face, finishing off the last soldier with little effort. Now let's get back to camp, Kunna said, huffing. Not one of those soldiers thought to try and ask me on a date. Sokka gagged. Ew, Gran. From what he could gather, the spirit wolf was taking Aang far to the southeast, in a direction he guessed was the southern water tribe. What was there? If Aang was correct, the wolf was going to bring him to an avatar temple, but he didn't know of any in this region. The wolf was surprisingly close to the speed of Appa's flight, but the wolf traveled with very long, very high leaps and bounds. It skirted across the water as if it wasn't even there, so they reached their destination in no time. Aang was able to surmise it was one of the islands immediately north of the southern water tribe among those of the Patola mountain range where the southern air temple resided, but he wasn't able to get a close look. The wolf leapt again, and disappeared right through the walls of the blue avatar temple with Aang right on his back. He didn't even flinch this time. The spirit wolf finally skidded to a stop in a large, empty chamber, devoid of everything except a large statue on the far wall. Aang picked one leg up and over the side of the wolf and slid down, letting his spirit feet touch the floor. He had eyes for nothing else, just the avatar statue, made of some sort of blue stone like aquamarine. As he walked closer, it was just as he expected Kuruk. All right, do I have to wait for some sort of solstice or something, again? He asked of nobody in particular. The wolf let out a low growl to get his attention, and he looked to where the animal pointed his snout. Up above the entrance of the chamber was a blue crystal which reflected the sunlight from outside. Just like in Roku's old temple, the sunlight was supposed to reflect at a certain angle, and then Aang would be able to talk to Kuruk. Okay, the summer solstice, how many days away is it, again? The wolf just seemed to give its own version of a shrug. Some help you are, he said to it. So what am I supposed to learn about this time? It wasn't really some awesome strength of the waterbenders or the firebenders he wanted to know. It was the spirit world that got him into this mess, and he was going to use it to get out. It was a shame. He was starting to get used to nice Azula. Chapter 8, Avatar Kuruk, Summer Solstice, Part 2. Aang didn't know what he expected to see when he traversed through the Water Nation's laboratory on the riverbank outside the village. He thought it might be bigger. More foreboding. Cold and wrought from iron and belching smoke like everything from the Fire Nation in his world, a monster with snapping jaws that poisoned the air, further injustice against the domain of the people they had wiped out a century ago. But this building, which he saw after he leapt over the walls surrounding it, was made of stone and almost disappointing in its mundanity. It had high arches and made him think of the buildings in the northern water tribe carved from ice, except that it had doors facing only to the south and the east. It bore no signs explaining its purpose, only the water tribe insignia emblazoned on the arches told passerby enough to stay away. Warriors stood guard with slings, bone clubs, and white mink hounds at the ends of leather leashes in case anyone didn't get the message. Aang sprung from the wall to the upper tiers of the laboratory and slipped inside through one of the circular windows. A foul, heavy scent hung in the hallways, similar to the rotten sulfurous smell coming from the river. Before doing anything, Aang kept moving down the numerous corridors in more of an effort to find some information than to do any real damage. The inside of the complex was nowhere near as guarded as the outside, and he was glad he came in through the upper levels instead of using the drainage pipe that released the laboratory's runoff into the river. About an hour before, Kurek's spirit wolf companion brought Aang back to the fishing village in the middle of the polluted river. It was then that Aang remembered Sokka hadn't been returned from the spirit world until he calmed the raging spirit of Heibai, and it took even longer for Aang to remember exactly how it was done. The black and white spirit had been angry over the loss of his forest, so Aang showed him proof that it would grow back again. He deduced that the painted lady needed proof that her river would be clean and healthy in order to get Azula back. And that brought him to the laboratory, which was just upriver. The laboratory seemed less like a factory and more like the university at Ba Sing Se, he had learned. Aang predominantly saw men in long blue robes with black silk hats, but with a start he realized that many were from the Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation, their numbers almost equal to the Water Tribesmen. All buried their heads in their research as if completely ignoring him, poring over heavy books and scrolls in a room that looked like a library, or sitting in another chamber with long tables and tinkering with instruments he had never seen before. The only woman he found knelt in another room manipulating water through the chi pathways of an acupuncture doll, its veins glowing with soft, blue light. The walls displayed no decoration of any kind, just informative diagrams and trigrams depicting the human body, the four elements, and a structure that looked like a cauldron or a furnace. The one exception, he noticed, was an artist's depiction of Tui and La, the ocean and moon spirits, in their eternal dance. He poked his head, unnoticed, into more and more chambers. In one room, he saw scholars holding up a familiar amulet between them, a silvery crescent moon shining at its lid. It made him wonder if they meant to research the properties of spirit oasis water, while in another room they seemed to be trying to figure out why platypus bears laid eggs. Curiosity nearly drove him deeper into some of the rooms, but he knew he couldn't linger. He was here to break stuff. Everyone was so engrossed into their research that they didn't notice when he slipped into an open atrium with no one in it. At the far end of the wall, he saw a three-tiered clay bench with 8 openings on each tier. Despite the size of the room, the heat in here was suffocating, and he realized the openings were ventilation shafts and the bench itself was a stove of some sort. On the highest tier, he saw a furnace shaped roughly like a cylinder. On the floor level, he found a smaller bronze cauldron on 3 legs with a brilliant vermilion metal burning inside, the traces of red he saw in the river. He had to bend down to see the characters etched into the cauldron like a ritual of some sort. He read one term he didn't recognize, Waden. But he did understand characters relating to clarity, balance, push and pull, change, and water. Altogether, it seemed to describe the natural process of turning water to steam and back to water and then to ice, but why would waterbenders need to study that when they could mostly do that themselves? He wished Sokka was there to help him make sense of all this. Behind him, toward the entrance of the atrium, he heard scrolls drop to the floor and roll down the steps. Hey! What are you doing here? Aang turned back to look at the scholar who entered, and he gave a sheepish grin. I got a little lost, he said. Can you help me? Absolutely not, kids shouldn't be here. The bespectacled man replied, an elder with pale blue eyes. He didn't look threatening, so Aang swung his staff at the door behind him instead of the scholar himself, slamming it shut so that the scholar was stuck in the atrium with him. The man gaped at the display of airbending. Oh. You're the Avatar. Yup, Aang said, tapping his chin to think of the best way to destroy this place. What would happen if I closed all the vents in that big furnace? The man stammered and pushed his glasses back up his nose with quivering fingers. Aang realized he wasn't an elder, but a young man who had just gone prematurely gray. Well, you see, that would be quite a terrible thing, because it might interfere with the reaction of cinnabar and quicksilver melting down in there, and, the only way for the heat to escape would be through the chimney, which normally wouldn't be catastrophic, but the loot lining the inside of the furnace is a new, experimental mixture for sealing, and it might have unforeseen consequences. I would highly recommend. Great, Aang said, swinging his staff at the furnace so all the vents closed with a sudden gale sweeping through the atrium. Thanks. Oh, dear, the man said, wringing his spindly fingers. If I were anyone else I would, be waterbending at you right now. Aang raised an eyebrow. Well, are you a waterbender? No. Aang frowned. Shouldn't you be running out of here in fear since it'll explode any second now or something? Oh, that, would have happened already if it were going to, he said, scratching his head of wild, wiry gray hair. The blasting jelly and firework powder chambers are the rooms that, might potentially maybe have a higher likelihood of exploding. Perhaps. Aang matched his movement and scratched the back of his own head. Thanks, I guess. Why are you helping me? The man threw his hands up in the air. Because you're terrifying. You're the Avatar. And I'm a coward, through and through. That's why I'm here instead of, training other warriors or some such. That's what they call me. Nuttuk, coward of the south. Also a blubbermouth, blabbermouth. Especially when I'm nervous. Aang tapped his staff on the floor and Nuttuk jumped about a foot in the air. Listen, I'm not going to. Down the hall and to the right, sneak by the Minkhound patrol, but don't worry because they can't smell you with all the funky stuff going on in here, and then cut through the herbal concoctions room, which you don't have to worry about because everyone in there's on break right now, and then you'll find your way to the firework powder room. He cringed and pointed a finger toward the hallway. Aang shrugged and went on his way. Okay. Thank you. Aang landed on the wooden docks of the tattered fishing village with a gentle tap, twirling his glider and folding it back into his staff. Doc, or was it Sue, was the first to run up to him, eyes bulging. What happened over there? The old man spit out, pointing in the direction of the laboratory. Now, a plume of black smoke billowed into the air. I just got the Water Nation out of here for you, Aang said. Now your river can be cleaned. Let the water flow downriver and wash away any impurities. Aang just hoped that the painted lady would bring Azula and the other villagers back before then. You did that all by yourself? Doc asked, shocked. How? The other villagers crowded around them, listening with rapt attention. Well, I am the Avatar, Aang answered. And let's leave it at that. Where's Zuko? He asked, looking around. His swordsman friend was nowhere to be seen. Oh, he was searching for you all night, Doc answered. He still hasn't come back yet. Aang's brow furrowed and he frowned, turning to look into the sky. The sun had only just started to peek over the mountain tops. Was he still searching? He had probably taken Appa. Aang was only mildly surprised. It seemed that this Zuko kept his avid determination. Doc took off his small hat, unveiling another one that unfolded on top of his head. Okay, let's clean some river. I'm Bushi, Doc and Sue's brother and the river cleaner. Aang slapped his forehead. Hours later, Aang started to get desperate and very impatient. All of the villagers went out on their rowboats, scooping up as much sludge and other wastes from the river as they could. Aang helped, more so because he wanted to get Azula back, and fast, than to really help the village. He, Zuko, and Azula needed to get to Avatar Kuruk's temple quickly, before the summer solstice started. He fleetingly thought about leaving Zuko and Azula while he did the dangerous work alone, but he knew the two very hot-headed siblings would want to be in the action. Then again, he remembered how much danger he was in when he went to Roku's temple with Sokka and Katara. He was prepared to face those dangers this time and counter them before they happened. Zuko finally arrived back at the village a few hours later, relieved to see Aang but concerned that his sister still wasn't there. He helped with the work with just as much fervor as Aang expected. It seemed that through the night, the young man's determination had not wavered. Aang was slightly unnerved over his protectiveness of Azula. He never imagined that the Zuko back home would ever feel that way towards his sister. Finally, nighttime fell. The river was noticeably clearer than it was before cleaning, but it still had a long way to go until it was perfectly blue again. As Aang stared into the river's depths, thinking about his next course of action, mist began to swirl around him. And then the unmistakable spirit form of the painted lady appeared before him, whispering two words, her voice echoing as if from underwater. Thank you. Aang smiled slightly as she faded away, swinging his feet off the edge of the dock. A moment later, several figures emerged from the mist, their feet pattering on the wooden planks. Angela was one of the first to come out and she came towards him. "What was that? What took you so long?" she immediately asked, lips pursed in annoyance. She inspected her nails the same exact way evil Angela did, and at that moment Aang felt anger bubbling in his gut like the cauldron full of cinnabar. "Do you know how hard we worked to get you back? Do you know what I did?" he exploded at her. She didn't even react to his outburst, perfectly in control of her anger, just as he knew her from his world. The fact that she didn't even seem hurt by his words took the wind out of his sails, a grim reminder that she wasn't the same as his other friends back home. "Never mind. Forget it." Like the snap of a firebrand, her response stung. "Oh, you cleaned up a river, did you? Boo-hoo. I'm sure that's much worse than spending a night and a day in the terrifying chaos of the spirit world." Zuko and the other villagers came running over, hearing the disturbance of the captured people returning home. "Angela!" Zuko shouted to his sister, running over to the two arguing benders. "You're all right?" Angela turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "Oh, was my brother Zuzu worried about me?" she asked, and her voice took on the false sweetness of lemon sap. Zuko's face fell from worry to vexation. Aang rubbed his temples, trying to keep his anger in check. Even with his older friends back in the real world, it was much easier for Aang to get angry than when he was younger. "Guys, let's stop fooling around. We have to get out of here." The two siblings, ready to start bickering, turned to him. "What?" Zuko questioned. "Where are we going?" Angela asked, freezing her fingers from flicking her brother's forehead. "The Water Nation. And we have to get there by tomorrow." Angela finished her movement and Zuko rubbed his head, scowling. "Well, first," she said, a little sheepish, "I need to excuse myself and find a bathroom." "Hey, Aang," Zuko called to the Avatar. "What? Did you ever hear the story of the moose lion that stole snacks from the better hunters? He didn't have any pride." And Zuko let out a chuckle, slapping his knee. Aang and Angela cringed. "That was hysterical, Zuzu," Angela said to her brother, rolling her eyes. "Uncle told me," he said with a lopsided grin. "You know, because moose lions have prides." Aang smushed his cheek against his fist, leaning against the side of the saddle. "Zuko, saber-tooth moose lions don't travel in prides. You're thinking of lion hares." Zuko crossed his arms and shrunk behind their pile of bedrolls. "Oh." For some reason, Aang almost couldn't blame him for the terrible joke. They had been flying over open ocean for hours with nothing to break the monotony. Aang felt little dread for what he knew must await them ahead. He figured he'd learn some horrible new truth, but he wanted to speak to Kuruk and demand to return home. He didn't know what his friends would do without him, or what was happening to his body after going into the spirit world, or if him being gone was holding them back. Of course, both Zuko and Angela jumped at the chance to go into Water Nation territory, but Angela, at least, seemed to regret it with the seemingly endless stretch of boring ocean all around them. With his earlier lack of sleep, Aang felt himself easily dozing off. "We're right on his trail, grandmother," Sokka said to Kunna as he stood on the deck of the ship, staring straight ahead. After raiding the previously polluted fishing village, Sokka learned that the Avatar headed to Kuruk's temple in the Water Nation, his own homeland. He was a little apprehensive about returning, he had to admit, but nothing was going to keep him from his goal. "Do you think you are making a wise decision, Sokka?" the old woman asked him. "What do you know, woman?" Sokka nearly growled at her. He was on edge and she knew it. "Teenagers," she muttered under her breath. "Sokka, you are going against your own decision to leave the Water Nation. You are treading on thin ice. Much of the Navy thinks you were banished or that you wrongfully abandoned your nation, they believe you are a traitor." "I'll be fine unless they have direct orders to take me down," Sokka said, churlish. "I don't know how that rumor spread, but even though things are weird with my father, he wouldn't take a direct attack on his heir lying down. No one's stupid enough to do that." "You've thought this through, then?" "We are approaching the Navy's barricade," Lieutenant Kinto said to the two royals. Sokka stared straight ahead with his one blue eye at the impressive line of silver ships, deciding to let his next order be his answer. "Kinto, let's pull out the Windsailor." Is that a water navy barricade? Angela suddenly asked, leaning over Appa to stare down below. The look on Aang's face was uneasy. We need to fly higher. Come on Appa, yip, yip. Aang called to his bison. Appa answered with a low groan of approval, rising in altitude and causing the wind to whip their faces. Bato looked through the ship's mounted telescope, gazing into the sky. With his naked eye, he saw a white blot in the distance, but with the magnified view, he was able to spot the flying bison, and far below it, a water tribe warship. There's our esteemed prince, he said, his eyes thinning to slits. Come on, Sokka. You're normally smarter than this. You know I have to fire directly on the Avatar if he comes this way. A marine approached him with a salute. Chief Bato. Bato turned to his captain. Fire on the Avatar. The captain's crisp salute loosened and he fumbled with the coil of rope used to prepare the ship's mounted weapons. But sir, one of our own is out there. Then don't hit him, Bato replied. The captain nodded and issued the order, perhaps a little reluctantly. Waterbenders on the decks of each ship in the blockade gathered water from the ocean around them, freezing them into boulder-sized chunks of ice in the middle of the deck. Then, all as one, they catapulted the ice blocks into the air, letting the ice's own momentum carry it to the Avatar. Another unit of marines readied the ballistae, normally for whaling, and fired on the bison with the intent to kill it. Aang! Zuko yelled, pointing at the ice boulders sailing through the air at them. I see them. He cried out, pulling on Appa's reins to dodge the rain of ice. Nearly 100 blocks half the size of Appa had been launched at them, reminding Aang disdainfully of a similar situation in the past. Azula and Zuko held onto Appa's saddle for their lives, eyes clenched shut. A particularly large chunk of ice headed right for them and Aang saw no easy way to dodge it. He sprang from Appa's head and slammed it with his staff, using his airbending to make it rocket down below, completely destroying one of the ships. He jumped off of the impact and back onto his bison, his gaze hard. Javelins speared through the air like enormous crossbow bolts, much more difficult and even more horrifying in their speed and deadliness. No amount of airbending would stop or divert those, so Aang focused all his efforts on twisting and weaving Appa through the assault. He pulled Appa higher into the sky, and thankfully the new weapons didn't have the capability of achieving that kind of height. The ice followed them even as they passed the naval blockade until they were out of their range. Aang stared ahead, his gaze solemn. The Water Nation was ahead. Zuko and Azula sighed with relief, but stiffened when they spotted something else behind them. What's that? Zuko asked, gaping. Some kind of kites following us. Sokka whooped as he flew through the air on his windsailor, over 100 feet in the sky like an airbender on a glider or a seabird in flight. Far below him, Kinto performed some high-speed waterbending on a catamaran, attached to Sokka with a rope and harness. His newest invention gave him speed and the maneuverability to dodge through the blockade's assault. This wasn't what he had in mind for the windsailor's first real test run, but it was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying, and best of all, it worked. One of the ice blocks aimed at the Avatar fell toward Sokka in its descent, but he let go of his control bar with one hand long enough to divert it with a single swipe, sending it crashing down on one of Bato's ships. Oops, Sokka said, unable to hold back from grinning. How clumsy of me. This plan necessitated leaving his grandmother and ship behind, but it couldn't be helped. It got him through the blockade and he planned to make use of it to reach the Avatar Temple even faster than he could have dreamed. Almost an hour later, the flying bison, with its passengers, reached the southern islands of the Patola mountain range, where Avatar Kurak's temple lay. The Azure Temple was situated at the peak of a snowy mountain on an island that was made up of several. Light flurries of snow blanketed the mountains, a sharp contrast to the gray stone that was so dark it was almost black. Hardy grasses and reeds stuck out of the mountainside in defiance of the cold. Aang looked wistfully at the horizon, knowing that he was near the Southern Air Temple, as well as Kyoshi Island and even the Southern Water Tribe, where his first adventure started. As Appa landed, he took a deep breath, ready to face whatever awaited him inside the temple. He had the bison land on the side of the mountain where there was an outcropping of rock large enough for them all to land on comfortably. A small trail not far from them wound up the side of the mountain, leading to the water temple at the mountain's peak. Well, here we go, Zuko said, bracing himself. Are you guys ready? Aang asked them. Oh, please. How hard could this be? Azula scoffed. All right. Appa, Momo, you stay here, Aang said to the two creatures. The female lemur stared at him curiously, and Aang realized his blunder. Luckily, neither Zuko nor Azula noticed, too focused on their mission ahead. Seibashi, you stay here with Appa. Minutes later, Aang was ready to make Azula eat her words. It was an incredibly difficult hike up the mountain, as the snowstorm above increased and threatened to blow them all off the mountainside. The cold seeped into all of their clothing, and because of the fierce amount of wind, Azula was unable to keep a decent flame of warmth alive. Aang wondered how it could be so cold in the early days of summer and thought it might have to do with the spirituality of the temple. Eventually, the Avatar Temple came into sight. The first part of it they saw was the crest at its top, like a beacon, a diamond shape carved from a stone that looked like ice. The multi-tiered roofs sloped down in the shape of several lilies piled on top of each other. Chimes rang like bells in the wind, decorated with a painted pattern to ward off evil spirits. They traveled the rest of the way up a glittering staircase of ice, and they were greeted by heavy doors also carved from frost that sealed the entrance into the temple. We should probably find a better way to get in here, Aang said. After a moment of thinking, he passed his staff to Azula and threw Zuko over his shoulder before he could shout in protest and leapt to the roof. The older boy let out an undignified shout that was swallowed by the blizzard, and Aang jumped back down to the ground to do the same for Azula, but she stepped back. Don't even think about it, she said, falling into a defensive stance with one finger held out to him while she gripped his staff in her other hand. Would you rather stay out here and freeze to death? She huffed at him and straightened. No. Without wasting any time, Aang scooped her over his shoulder like he did to Zuko and jumped up to the roof where he placed her down and she almost slipped. You know, I thought you airbenders were more graceful. Look, I found a way in, Aang said, ignoring her and taking his staff back. On one side of the temple were dark blue shutters, which Aang tried feebly to pull open. They had been frozen shut, coated in a layer of rime that Azula melted away with hotter than normal flames. Several teeth-chattering minutes later, Aang tugged on them again, to no avail. Here, let me, Zuko said, aiding him. He was able to pull them open with one hand. Aang frowned. He missed his own physical strength. He didn't thank Zuko. Instead, he jumped inside the temple and lithely rolled to his feet. The inside of the temple shared the blue theme with the outside. As Zuko and Azula crawled in after him, he admired the beautiful water-bending mosaics, interrupted by random panels of ice on the walls. He wondered what they were for. A moment later, he heard footsteps walking down one of the hallways adjacent to his. He motioned for Zuko and Azula to stay back as Aang gripped his staff, prepared to deal with whatever it was. He cautiously stepped forward and turned around the corner. He was surprised when he nearly bumped into an old woman. Who are you? She asked, giving him one wide eye of suspicion. What are you doing in this sacred place? I am the Avatar. Bring me to Kuruk, Aang demanded, holding out his staff. The woman, a priestess or one of the water sages, wore heavy robes lined with white fur and a matching cap with flaps that covered her ears. She expressed surprise upon seeing him, but raised a hand and sent ice spikes flying at Aang. Immediately after, she turned away from him and ran, leaving Aang to ward off her attack with a wall of wind. She ran down the hallways shouting out in her hoarse voice. The Avatar is here. The Avatar has returned. She screamed, setting off the alarm. More old women water sages emerged from the different hallways, attacking him with a coat of ice that stuck to the walls. Azula stepped in front of him and burned away the attacks. She scowled at the women's retreating back. Dumb old crones. Aren't they supposed to support the Avatar? Aang growled under his breath. He should have expected this. He ran down the cold corridors, dodging the waterbenders' attacks and warding them off to allow Zuko and Azula to pass. Aang turned the corners at a rapid pace, searching for the entrance to Kuruk's chamber. He was able to stop himself just in time when he noticed the coating of ice on the floor. Zuko, Azula. He tried to warn them, but the two siblings ignored him and sped right towards him, but before they could notice that he stopped, Aang jumped into the air as the two toppled to the icy floor, sliding across it and crashing into the wall on the other side of the hallway. Aang ran after them carefully with practiced, sure feet. Before he could reach them, a hand wrapped in water tribe furs reached out at the two and pulled them away. As Aang turned the corner, ready to stop the water sage, he readied his staff to fight. He saw the old woman with a grasp on Zuko and Azula. Aang was about to swing his weapon at her, but she held up a hand and stopped him. "Wait, I want to help," she said to him, her voice hushed. "Quickly, this way." Before Aang could even speak, she put her hand on one of the icy wall panels, melting the cold away. It revealed a door, which she opened. "Inside, before the others find us," she urged them. Aang sighed with relief. It seemed that there was a traitor among these sages' ranks, too. "I am Water Sage Yugoda," the woman said, revealing a kind, elderly face. Her gray hair was held back in braided hair loops. Something about the name sounded familiar, but Aang couldn't place where he had heard it. "Pleased to meet you. I am Avatar Aang," he said, bowing. "These are my friends, Zuko and Azula." "Aren't the sages supposed to help the Avatar?" Zuko asked her, annoyed. Yugoda's face fell. "Once, a long time ago," she answered. "The others have become corrupt. But I am a distant relative of Avatar Kuruk's wife, before she was taken away from him. She was my grandmother's youngest sister," she said with a distant smile. "I'd like to speak with Avatar Kuruk," Aang said to her. "I thought that was why you have come," Yugoda replied. "This way, please." She led them through a tunnel of ice with an uneven staircase that led up and deeper into the temple. Avatar Kuruk's chamber was close, he could feel it. "My father once told me that waterbender women weren't trained to fight. What's the deal with these water sages?" Azula asked with a frown. "We are the only exception to that rule," Yugoda said. "We were sent to protect the temple of Avatar Kuruk, when no man would want the job. They are too busy fighting this war. But I volunteered and moved here all the way from the Northern Water Tribe." Zuko whistled. "You volunteered? Because of your ancestor?" "I was born and raised in the Northern Water Tribe," Yugoda explained. "But I've always wanted to fight with my waterbending, instead of only healing. Being a water sage helped me become what I've always wanted to be," she said with a gentle smile. Azula scoffed with something like derision. "It's so backwards there. Your people cripple their own forces by half and forbidding women to fight. I never understood those rules." Yugoda shrugged. "It has long been the tradition among our people. The princess of the Southern Water Tribe is really making an effort to let women learn all kinds of waterbending," Yugoda went on to explain proudly. "She's really an inspiration to Water Nation women everywhere." Aang raised an eyebrow, wondering who the princess was. "You? If she's around, she'd be the type to do that, I think." "Well, good for her. Maybe I can see her someday." Abruptly, before the conversation could be continued any further, the narrow tunnel opened up to an expansive, icy chamber. There was old Water Tribe artwork on the walls of a very powerful waterbender, etched onto stretched, leathery animal skin. On the other wall, Aang spotted a giant, blue door that was covered in ice, keeping it frozen shut. Yugoda was the first to approach the door. "Many places in the Water Nation are only accessible by waterbenders," she informed them, placing a hand on the frozen door. The ice melted away at her touch. "Hurry, Avatar. Get inside before the other sages come. They're bound to check up here soon." With Zuko's help, he was able to pull open the large, heavy door, and he stepped inside. Sokka barged into the water temple, frantic and determined. "Where's the Avatar? I know he's here," he yelled as water sages hurried into the main chamber. They fell into bows at his feet. "Prince Sokka, your arrival is so unexpected," one of them said. "Tell me where the Avatar is." "I know he's here," Sokka shouted at them. He searched among them, briefly, for a familiar face with her distinctive hair, but he had no time to search her out. He had to make sure the Avatar was in his clutches before Bato arrived. I am sorry, but he's loose in the temple," the woman said. "Where?" he demanded. He's probably going to see Avatar Kuruk right now. At that moment, unknown to Aang, the sunlight shone on the crystal at just the right angle, directing a beam of light to the statue of Avatar Kuruk's forehead. The summer solstice had arrived. Aang opened his eyes as the blinding mist cleared all around him. All he saw was an expanse of white, a snowy wasteland. Snow gently fell down, getting caught in his rugged head of hair, which was getting longer every day. A gust of wind blew in front of him and Avatar Kuruk appeared. He looked exactly the same as when Aang last saw him, young, and wearing full water tribe clothing with the head of a polar bear as his mask. "Nice to finally meet you, kid," Kuruk said. "There's something important I need to tell you." "Wait." Aang quickly stopped him. "What do you mean, nice to finally meet me? We've met before." Kuruk's tanned face turned to one of confusion. "We have." "Yeah. You, Yang Chen, Roku, and Kyoshi were the ones who sent me to this place. I want to go home." Aang yelled at him, unable to bottle his anger. Meeting a version of Kuruk who didn't recognize him, or at least, this version of him, was an eventuality he didn't expect. He couldn't have come all this way for nothing. "I'm sorry, but what are you babbling about?" Kuruk asked him, scratching his head with his gloved hand. "You sent me to this world." Aang bellowed. "I want to go home, I need to help my friends. I miss Sokka, I miss Toph, and I miss Katara." As he mentioned their names, his body became racked with sobs. He fell to his knees in the snow. This couldn't be happening. Could this Kuruk be different, too? "I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about," Kuruk admitted, and Aang knew it to be the truth as much as he knew himself. "I wish I could help, but there's something else I need to tell you." Several of his soldiers followed him as Sokka strode into the chamber. The Avatar's firebender and the other Fire Nation boy tried to stop him, as well as the old waterbender, but they were quickly stopped by his soldiers and chained to the ice pillars in the center of the room. Sokka patrolled in front of the giant door that led to Kuruk's chamber, furious and impatient. "Why won't it open?" he growled as his soldiers tugged at the door. "Avatar Kuruk is forbidding us entry," one of the other water sages said. They all dutifully ignored the traitor in their midst. "Good to see you again so soon, Prince Sokka." The fallen prince's body froze. "What do you want, Bato?" he asked the man through clenched teeth, refusing to move around to meet his gaze. "I've come to receive the Avatar," he said, and Sokka knew he smirked with triumph without even looking. "Maybe even help you do it. I hope you haven't forgotten our ways of hunting for prey along with your family. Like a pack of wolves. I trust your time in exile hasn't made you forget even that." Sokka turned to face him, gritting his teeth. "You're not my family, Bato. Neither of you will ever get your hands on Aang." The firebender shouted out at them. "He's too strong for all of you. You won't stop him." "I'd like to see about that," Bato said, as more of his soldiers came into the chamber. Aang frowned from his position in the snow, wiping away his angered tears. He was frustrated that he let tears fall. He never cried anymore. He stiffened when Kuruk mentioned something he needed to tell Aang. "Lay it on me." Kuruk frowned. "I know it'll sound tough, but I know you can do it. You ready? Just tell me." "That's what Roku always did," Aang said wearily. "He was blunt about that sort of thing." Kuruk frowned. "Okay. I wasn't aware that Roku spoke to you. But at the end of the winter, a terrible thing awaits you. There is a second moon, Sirius Moon, that appears in the sky above our world. The power of the waterbenders will increase a whole lot more than it usually does every month. So I'll have to master all 4 elements and defeat the Waterlord before then, right?" Aang asked, shoulders falling. "The Water Emperor," Kuruk corrected him. "But yes, you will. Don't worry too much, you've mastered all 4 elements several times in your past Li." "I've mastered them all once already," Aang told him, interrupting the Water Avatar's words. "I can do it again. I'm sorry that we're putting all of this on you at once, Aang. But you can defeat him and save the world." "I know it. How can I do that when I haven't even saved my own world?" Aang suddenly yelled out at him, standing up. "I failed my own friends. I didn't defeat the Fire Lord in time for Sozin's Comet and everyone I knew and loved died. And I'd still be with them if you didn't send me here to this messed up world. How can you expect me to do it again? Every inch of his body ached, but he felt unburdened. It was nice to vent his frustrations out on someone. I don't know what you're talking about. Kuruk yelled back at him. It wasn't me that sent you here. Aang clenched his fists. It was all of you. I can't believe this, you must be a different Kuruk, then. Aang slumped to his knees in defeat. I'll never be able to go home. I don't understand. What happened to you? Kuruk asked him. Hurry, we don't have much time left. In my own world, the Fire Nation ruled over everything, Aang began, gulping down the pain he felt. He wouldn't forgive himself if he wavered or stuttered as he spoke to Kuruk. Sozin's Comet came, strengthening the firebenders to the point where they were unstoppable. They had a firm grip on the world, but my friends and I were able to travel around in secret and stop them. I journeyed to the spirit world to restore my avatar spirit when I had enough of the war, but I spoke to all of my past lives and Yang Chen sent me here. Now, I'm fighting against my old friends and allying with my former enemies. I'm so lost. And confused. Damn it. He sounded weak at the end, and it made him angry again. Kuruk was silent for a long time. Aang began to think their time together would run out before he responded again. I see, he said finally. I don't know what to say to that. He paused and looked back to the door. We don't have time left, but there are Water Nation soldiers outside, waiting to ambush you. Aang sighed. Oh, and everything is basically a repeat of last time, but reversed, Aang added. I've figured out that this timeline, or whatever it is, has been following my last adventures, but there have been some changes. I will speak to some of the older spirits about it, Kuruk told him. Now, I'm going to help you fight off your enemies. Aang nodded and closed his eyes. Until we meet again. Azula tried to wriggle free of the chains binding her to the ice pole, but she couldn't move a muscle. She was irritated when she started to get worried for Aang. She knew he was strong, but she didn't know if he was strong enough to defeat all of these warriors. Bato paced in front of the heavy doors as they rumbled open, grinding across the floor. Sokka looked up, pulling water to coil around his wrists while he readied his boomerang in his other hand, and the other warriors took up similar fighting positions. Aang, look out! Zuko shouted. Two glowing orbs appeared inside the dark chamber, and Zuko and Azula remembered the Avatar state's power and exaltation with haunting clarity. Bato laughed as if it were no more than a simple thrill until a full-grown man stepped out of the chamber instead of Aang. The Water Tribe man in the Avatar state moved his arms above his head, melting the ice pillars that Zuko, Azula, and Yugoda were tied to, letting them free. Ice spikes plunged from out of the walls, and torrents of water rushed out at everyone in the room. Somehow, the three that were chained up weren't bothered by the torrent. The whole temple began to shake and they all heard a distant rumbling from outside. Sokka and Bato's leather-clad warriors turned and fled from the temple, followed by the water sages who urged their prince and commander to leave. Come on, Zuzu. We need to get out of here. Azula yelled to her brother. Yugoda, come on. The winds picked up all around them, shaking the very foundations of the temple. Azula was determined to get out of there if only to save her own skin. Bato and Sokka were lost in the chaos. Yugoda urged them to follow the other water sages. The roof of the temple ripped off and was lost in the storm outside, but Kuruk remained where he was, manipulating the storm around them. The snow and the cold whipped at Zuko and Azula like lashes. The very mountain they were on trembled, causing the snow to fall down in an avalanche. If we don't get out of here soon, the avalanche will destroy the temple. Zuko yelled to his sister over the roaring winds. He hesitated because of Aang. We can't just leave him here. I know. Azula shouted back. She wrenched her eyes shut, trying to think of something. For the first time, not a plan came to mind. She was utterly helpless and hated the feeling of it. They both saw a white form in the distance, battling against the winds. It's Appa. Zuko let out a bellow to get his attention, clutching onto the ruins of the walls for support. As the bison came closer with a furious roar, they noticed Sabi clinging to his saddle with her tiny arms. The Avatar was going to rip them all off the mountainside. Aang's going to kill us. Azula cried out, panicked. At her words, the Avatar's fury and anger seemed to be quenched and sated. A whirlwind surrounded Avatar Kuruk, blocking him from their view, but when it dissipated, Aang stumbled to the ground in his place. He fell to his knees. Zuko and Azula hesitated going over to him while Appa was able to stabilize himself right outside the temple. The avalanche still continued to tear down the mountain. Azula tried to approach him, almost timid. Aang. Her golden eyes were wide with concern for him. Aang's head turned up at them, his grey, hardened eyes locking onto Appa. "Let's get out of here," he said to them, sprinting over to the two. Zuko grabbed his staff just as Aang snatched the backs of their shirts to jump onto Appa's back. They flew away just as the surge of snow swallowed the remains of the temple, letting it fall down the mountainside. The storm above cleared. "Tell us everything," Azula said to Aang. "You're all traitors." Bato bellowed at the water sages, handling them while Sokka departed for the island's docks, where his ship waited for him. "All soft and weak, the lot of you." "It was all Yugoda, sir." "She's the traitor," one of the water sages pleaded. "Let us go." Yugoda put her head down in apparent shame, even though Bato knew she helped the Avatar willingly. "Shut up." Bato silenced her. "All of you will be brought to Aniaktu as prisoners. All you've done is prove that women can't be relied upon to handle things at the temple." He held the flame headpiece in his hand so that it reflected the light in the sky as his warriors led the women away. If he couldn't rely on Sokka's help, he'd have to make sure to stay several steps ahead of the prince. Chapter 9, The Fire-Bending Scroll. "Congratulations," said Zuko, pressing a closed fist to his palm and bowing. "You're a fire-bending master." Aang returned the bow and smiled. "Thank you, Saifu Zuko." And just like that, he had mastered all 4 elements. The world was still in ruins, his past lives were out of reach, and the Avatar state might have been gone forever, but one part of his Avatar journey had been done right. He felt like he had accomplished something, even if it took about 3 years, far past his deadline of Sozin's comet. But that didn't matter anymore. Sokka jumped down from the fallen log he used as his vantage point to watch their training session. He bit his lip in his usual way that meant a snide remark had been brewing. "Can you really say if he's mastered fire-bending? I thought you weren't even a master, Zuko." Aang laughed but Zuko crossed his arms. "Like you would know, Sokka." Katara emerged from the underbrush and came into the clearing with a drawstring bag in her arms and Toph at her heels. "Oh, Sokka, leave him alone," she said, and then she looked at Aang and he felt like he could shoot rockets from his feet. "You know what? I think this calls for a celebration. Here, everyone. Reach your hand into the bag for a surprise." She held it open, grinning expectantly. "I mean, I already know." "Shush, Toph, don't spoil it." All 4 of them did so and pulled out garishly painted, hand-carved masks one by one. Zuko even cringed when he got a blue demon mask that bore more than a passing resemblance to his old blue spirit mask. "You got us masks?" Aang asked. "Yes. There's a festival in the nearby village. I think we could use some good cheer for once." Zuko groaned. "Oh, yeah. The Fire Days Festival. It's that time of year, isn't it?" Aang frowned and a long-forgotten memory swam to the surface of his thoughts. "Katara, is that a good idea? We went to that festival once and it didn't end well." "It's a special occasion," she said, circling behind him to tie his mask to his face. "The beginning of the era of Avatar Aang. Which deserves a moment of fun, if you ask me. I insist." Aang didn't have the heart to remind her that just mastering the elements didn't make him a fully realized Avatar, but they went along to the village anyway. Despite being a colony, it felt like they stepped into the Fire Nation proper. Splashes of all different colors assaulted their vision from flags and banners and flames that burned different types of powders and came out in a rainbow. Citizens of all ages rushed by with streamers or sparklers in their hands and masks on their faces, laughing and cheering as if the world outside their town hadn't changed at all. Noodles cooked in street stalls and the smell of spices reached Aang's nose even through the mask. He had to dodge out of the way of a bearded dragon dancing through the streets, its golden paint shining in the firelight of all the lanterns. They passed a puppet show and fire-bending demonstrations. Sokka and Zuko shared a bag of fire flakes, but for the most part, Team Avatar didn't partake in the revelry. They enjoyed the anonymity, 5 ghosts drifting through the celebration, watching and wishing for better times. They found a bench on the outskirts of town far from the heart of the crowds that gave them a decent overhead view of the ceremonial torch in the center of town and the clear night sky. After the torch had been lit, an effigy and offering of flame to Fire Lord Azula and Phoenix King Ozai, fireworks whistled and bloomed in the sky. The booming sounds made Toph stiffen at Aang's side, pressed together as they all were, and he entwined his hand in hers to comfort her. She let out a grunt. "I don't know what's so special about fireworks," she said. "No different from regular old bombs to me." Aang wanted to say she was right, but it was important to Katara that they try to find small enjoyments like this. To keep smiling even when it hurt. They all fell silent, leaning into each other as they watched. They ignored it when someone twitched or shuddered or gasped and just held on tighter in response. The bench was just big enough for the 5 of them to sit side by side. No room for Suki or Haru or Iroh or anyone else who should have been there with them to ring in the beginning of a new era, who they missed so fervently regardless. Historians would only record the day as any other in the era of the Phoenix King. Behind the anonymity of his mask, Aang let the tears fall as explosions ripped apart the sky. Aang shot up from his sleep, his eyes wide with fear as sweat streamed down his face. His dark hair clung to his head, damp with sweat. His breaths came out in long gasps. "What's wrong?" Azula asked, startling him. Apparently, he had fallen asleep under the sun on the back of Appa's saddle. The wind blew his shawl over his head, tickling his face. Aang pushed it down and rubbed his eyes, loosening his tense muscles with a sigh. "It was just a bad dream," he said to her. He sat back against the side of Appa's saddle, letting Zuko fly the bison for a while. Their detour to Kuruk's temple had them essentially starting their journey over, returning to the outer islands of the Fire Nation as they went back on course to the Golden City. Aang briefly considered changing course to the Earth Kingdom, but Zuko had informed him that route would likely be dangerous, since it would require following the Earth Kingdom's shoreline to the northern reaches and most of it was likely to be under control of the water tribes. "You've been having those very often lately," Azula pointed out to him, crossing her arms and staring inquisitively. "What, are you worried about me?" "It's nothing," he said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "You are worried that you'll fail the whole world and that it'll be flooded completely on the day of Seirio's moon, completely destroying all civilization as we know it, right?" she asked, her voice precise and calculating. Aang stared at her with wide eyes, his mouth slightly hanging open. Even Zuko halted Appa for a moment to stare at her. Yeah, sure," Aang stuttered. The awkward moment passed and Appa continued flying. "Still, it must be very difficult and daunting to have to learn all 4 elements before winter's end," Azula said. What was she hinting at? "Yeah, and you're not helping," Aang said, rolling his eyes. "And you're surprisingly not very nervous about it. But I was obviously able to tell that you were from your nightmares. You're hiding your feelings. What are you keeping from us?" She crawled toward him with every sentence, her eyes widening. Desperate for information. Aang pushed himself against the edge of Appa's saddle. "It's got to be something else besides this Seirio's moon business. Wow, she's really perceptive. She doesn't miss a thing. You miscalculated." "I'm fine," Aang said to her, holding up his hands in a defensive position. Her face was uncomfortably close to his. "Well, I guess since you so desperately need it, I can teach you some of the fire bending I know," she said, pulling back from him and sitting back down. She spoke with an air that she was doing him a great favor and it was a hassle to her. Aang saw the opportunity to get away from dangerous ground and took it. "Sure, that'd be good." "All right, that's settled then," she said, grinning. She clearly had some kind of ulterior motive, but Aang was too relieved to think about that at the moment. "Zuzu, land this bison. We're going to have a quick fire-bending lesson." Aang didn't know why he couldn't bring himself to tell Azula that this wasn't the way things were supposed to be. He didn't think he could ever tell her, or Zuko, for that matter, that the Fire Nation ruled the world in another place, that they both once hunted for him, and that their enemy, Prince Sokka, was his best friend. Could he tell her that he kept seeing her as someone evil, someone who hunted him and his friends? Could he tell them that their father was a ruthless tyrant? Would they believe him? Would they shun him? Wait, Aang stopped himself. Why did he even care about getting acceptance from Azula? More importantly, he wondered if he was even going to be able to bend fire. Back when he first discovered he wouldn't be able to return back home easily, he tried to bend any element besides air with no luck. There seemed to be almost a sort of mental barrier that he couldn't pass no matter how hard he tried. At times, he had taken to wondering if he could even bend the other elements, but then he remembered that he was able to access the Avatar state. Would getting an informal lesson help him relearn the information? What would he do if he couldn't do it? Aang looked long and hard at the spot that Zuko deemed appropriate for the quick fire bending lesson. They situated themselves on a large patch of spongy, mossy ground in a clearing that was part of a wider, wilder jungle not unlike the one at Zuko and Azula's home. Aang wasn't very worried about losing control of his fire once he had it alive. He assumed he'd be able to control it like he used to. Besides, if anything got out of hand, there was a small pond nearby. They were a fair distance away from any forest, which was just on the outskirts of the pond, and a rocky crag shielded them from curious eyes. Zuko suspected that no waterbenders had been here in some time because the ground hadn't been dried out from their attacks. Aang braced himself for his first lesson with Azula. He found himself wondering how she would compare to Katara, Toph, and Zuko's lessons. "We'll start by making a ball of fire in our hands, like this," the girl said, holding out her hand palm up. A flame danced in her grip like a lantern on a dark night. It was a very common and easy ability. Aang knew from experience, even though he had trouble when he first tried it. He held out his hand like she did, but nothing happened. He didn't expect it, anyway. He had tried this before. "You're not even going to tell me how to?" She interrupted him with a curt interjection. "Make a flame." Aang rolled his eyes. "But how?" "Do it." Zuko, watching from the side, snickered. "You've got to be kidding me," Aang mumbled. "She's not a good teacher at all. I can't make fire. You need to tell me how." "You're hopeless." "Fire comes from the breath," she said, rolling her eyes. Aang immediately knew the real reason why she volunteered to teach him what she knew. She enjoyed ordering him around for once, and being the one in charge. Aang complied anyway, taking a deep breath. He concentrated, but on what, he didn't know. There had to be something else he was forgetting. "I can't do it." "Something's wrong," Aang said after a moment. "Zuko." She called her brother tersely. "Get some firewood." Zuko jumped as if his seat had burned. "Why me?" "Because you're the one watching," she said. "Now go get it." "I'll get it," Aang said, before Zuko stood. Aang walked to the edge of the forest to receive the tinder required for the fire. He hoped that it was for Azula's lesson and not for one of her own pointless reasons to annoy him. He had thought Toph was bad, but he preferred her lessons over Azula's any day. The wooden hull of the ship creaked as it rocked in the waves, and Sokka concentrated on the maps in front of him, trying to plan out the Avatar's route or current location. So far, he'd had no luck. He was the ship's navigator and it was his job to plan their destination, but ever since he returned to Fire Nation waters he couldn't find any clues as to the Avatar's whereabouts. He absently carved a piece of wood with his whittling knife to occupy his hands while his mind worked. They currently sailed along the coast of the Fire Nation's eastern archipelago. They had departed from Avatar Kuruk's island with the utmost speed in an attempt to follow the young Avatar and avoid Bato. Part of him had to admit he was being childish, because Bato did have superior resources he could have used, but he wanted to prove he could do this on his own, without having to rely on his father or Bato. He cross-referenced his maps to the Avatar's routes that he had previously tracked, trying to discern a pattern. His movements seemed almost random, flitting from one island to another, with sightings across both the western and eastern skies. He'd been seen on Crescent Island and Jiduan on the mainland. Ultimately, their destination seemed to be somewhere to the north, somewhere fortified and safe, like the Golden City. It had been his prevailing theory, but he knew if that was indeed where the Avatar had been heading, he'd have a slim chance of capturing the boy once he achieved their protection. Assuming the Avatar resumed this route after the detour to Kurek's temple, a gamble, Sokka had to admit, but one he felt confident about. The Eastern Archipelago was the closest part of the Fire Nation from there, and thus where he must have made his first landfall again. The Airbender never touched down on the same place twice. He tended to avoid towns and villages under Water Nation control. And when he did visit them, he caused enough of a ruckus to get noticed, like at the alchemical laboratories. He'd have to restock soon. Sokka searched his maps for the nearest neutral port in the Eastern Archipelago and grinned to himself when he spotted one. Kekalai Island, known for its jumble of docks and jungles where ancient Fire Nation temples and cave systems lay in ruins, said to be cursed by spirits that had been angered by centuries of explorers violating their sanctity. Despite being a port town, the Water Nation had little interest in it. Part of it was superstition, but the predominant reason was an uneasy alliance with the pirate fleets in the area who frequented the island. Sokka was interrupted from the rest of his planning by a loud knock on the wooden door. The sudden sound made his hand slip and he cut his thumb on his wood carving knife. "Come in," he said, letting out a hiss through clenched teeth. He shook the pain from his hand and sucked on the wound. His grandmother entered with a sad frown on her face. "Prince Sokka, we need to get to a port." "I agree," he said. "Kekalai Island. It's close. The Avatar's got to be there." "Yes, but I ran out of my cookie ingredients, and I wanted to make some for the crew." Sokka examined his hand to make sure the bleeding had stopped and glanced at the piece of wood he had carved. He hadn't been thinking about what shape he was making, but it looked a little bit like a bear or a fish, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. "I do not want to stop my search for the Avatar for your cookies. But it's important. Someone needs to make some good dessert around here," the old woman said. "It will be my gift to the crew for working so hard." I said, "No, we can't. If we're going to beat the Avatar to Kekalai Island, I have to set a trap for him. There's not enough time for shopping, as tempting as it is." "I can't believe you talked me into this," Sokka said with a scowl, watching his crew lug tons of needless souvenirs onto the ship. All purchased at ludicrous prices from a pirate ship. "This is just junk." "No, it's not. I have plenty of new ingredients for cookies now," his grandmother protested with her hands on her hips. She looked up at him, her wrinkles pronounced in a deep frown. "There's also my sewing materials and reading scrolls. But I was very lucky to find new, rare Paisho tiles. Oh, and take a look at this," she said, holding up a tiny, white whistle. "It's shaped like some kind of animal, but it seems to be broken." "All of it's useless old lady stuff that we don't need," Sokka grumbled, crossing his arms. His eye caught a glimpse of something red and gold sticking out of one of the crates as it passed by him, and he plucked it from among the rest of the useless baubles, a fire-bending scroll. He bit his lip and smiled as an idea formed in his mind. "That girl with the Avatar is a fire-bending novice, right? And we've never seen him use anything other than airbending outside of his super glowy mode, either." He had a feeling that it was called something else when the Avatar's eyes and tattoos glowed, but his primary concern whenever that happened was hightailing it out of there instead of sussing out what it really was. "Think they might like this little gift." By the time he was back, Zuko had a sort of fire pit ready, so Aang threw the twigs inside. Azula lit it easily with a trail of fire from her wrists. The two siblings sat down next to the fire. "I'm ready to try again," Aang said. He stood next to the fire and took a deep breath. Azula copied him. "Listen, Aang," she said. Aang's eyes widened. Was she about to apologize again for her earlier actions? Azula and apologies didn't go well together. It unnerved him to see her act so human, even now, when he was finally getting to know her. She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for being too rough on you earlier. I wasn't really teaching you anything about firebending." As she said this, Zuko caught Aang's gaze and smiled. So, Zuko is the reason for this, Aang thought, inwardly praising him. It seemed that he had some influence on his younger sister after all. "It's okay," Aang said. "I've had my fair share of rough teachers." He thought again about his first lessons of earthbending with Toph. Now, he figured that Azula was still aggravated over the loss of her mother's headpiece, but he had a strong suspicion that Sokka was the one who somehow stole it. "All right," Azula said quickly, as if determined to forget about her apology, "we'll continue the lesson now. With a flame already alive for you to try and control, this should make it easier." She put her hand near the fire and the crackling flames moved closer to her, bending to her will. "You have to feel the heat of the fire outside of you and inside of you. You have to have the desire to control it. Fire bending is all about control," she explained. With a slight movement of her hand, a piece of the fire went out to it, resting in her palm. "Now, you try to do that." And then, it all made sense to him. As soon as Azula said those words and he saw the flame go into her hands, something seemed to click inside of his head. A long-distant memory had resurfaced, and he suddenly remembered how to control fire and the basics of fire bending. It was as if a block on his mind was removed. He found that he still didn't remember some of the more elaborate attacks, but now fire bending seemed so simple. Instead of taking the flame in his palm from their campfire, Aang punched the air, letting out a small blast of the element. Zuko fell back, surprised, and even Azula took a step away from him. "What was that?" the firebender asked. "Wow, it turns out Azula's a good teacher after all," Zuko exclaimed, shock written all over his face. "How did you do it so soon?" Azula asked him. Her gaze was scrutinizing. She did not like to be surprised. "I guess you are a great teacher," Aang said with a cheesy grin, in his opinion. "Thank you, Saifu Azula." "You were holding back the whole time," Azula said, ignoring him. "That's the only thing that can explain it." "The Avatar is the best bender in the world, isn't he?" Zuko asked her. "It's only reasonable that he can bend fire so easily." Aang felt himself appreciating the fact that Zuko stood up for him. "What else can you do, Avatar?" Azula asked. "I want to see if that was just a fluke." She used both hands to make the campfire into a ball, pulling her hands up into the air and thrusting her palms out, sending it at him. Pure reflex came to Aang and he jabbed his fingers into it, pulling it apart in two different directions. Aang felt strengthened by the light of the sun on his back, a distantly familiar feeling. Aang grinned. "If it's a challenge you want, you'll get it," he thought roguishly. He decided to perform his very first fire-bending move on her. He held a tiny flame above his head and bent his knees. He let the fire fall into his hands where he spread it out and let it grow, creating a ring of fire all around him. Instead of burning Azula's hand, however, she swiftly chopped it in half. She ran toward him with her next attack, her fist wreathed in flames. She sent the punch at him, but he blocked her arm with his forearm. For a moment, stormy gray eyes met her ember ones, but Aang ducked when she sent a punch at his face. Fire came to life between his fingers as he used his superior speed to get behind her, ready to attack again, but she bent down, twisting her leg up to kick him in the chin with the sole of her foot. Thankfully, she wasn't concentrating on fire bending at that moment, but even so it knocked Aang to the ground. He rubbed his chin as Azula turned around, faintly surprised with her luck. "That was pretty flexible of you," Aang said, sitting up with a frown. "If I used my air bending you would have been done for." Azula smirked. "Yeah, I know, but that wasn't the point of our little training session, was it? You're just not on par with me yet in firebending. Too bad. Try again next time." Aang's eyebrow twitched. "You guys, stop fighting," Zuko said, chiding them like children. "I was just checking through our things, and we're out of supplies. We have to find a town and buy some more." Aang picked up his staff and walked to the exit of the clearing with a slump in his step that wasn't there before. He couldn't place why, but the fact that Azula showed him up felt kind of irritating. "All right, let's go." Their route had brought them to a ramshackle port town composed of a series of crisscrossing docks extending into the sea from the jungle taking up most of the island. Homes floated on the surface of the water or elevated on wooden planks above the docks with enormous palm fronds sticking out of the top of thatched roofs. In addition to the floating homes, merchant ships docked on the outskirts of town and peddled their wares right on their decks and under the sun. Hawkers shouted to get people to come aboard and peruse. As a whole, The town made Aang think of a combination between the Zhanghui fishing village and Ember Island. He didn't look at the clear seawater as they walked above it, didn't admire the gentle surf or the swaying seaweed forest under their feet. It had occurred to Aang that he was no stronger than he was the first time around in his world, and it made him wonder what might have changed in his world if he had been stronger and more focused on his training to begin with. He couldn't keep up with Azula's firebending. Was that because he was younger now? He had been 15 or 16, they'd lost track of the days, before he came to this world, a master of all four elements. It had taken him too long to do so that time, but now he could train harder. Smarter. He could become a stronger avatar. Maybe make a difference this time. Hey, you kids. A street vendor yelled at the three of them, grabbing their attention. Aang turned to see a small, wiry man who looked just as suspicious as everyone else in the port city, trying to lure in customers for his shop on the boat behind him. Come to this shop. We have all kinds of interesting, exotic things. Wanna go, Aang? Zuko asked, turning to the younger boy. The store vendor came up and put his arm around Aang, and immediately the young boy was hit with his smelly, putrid breath. These guys weren't good news. You guys don't happen to be pirates, do you? Aang asked, unhappy about seeing these particular people again. He remembered his run-ins with them very well. It had been exciting at the time, but they'd been able to capture Aang with ease. We prefer to be called high-risk traders, the man said with a clever grin. So I've heard, Aang said with a sigh. Let's get out of here, guys. Zuko started to walk away with him, but Azula didn't move. Well, I want to go, the firebender said, walking onto the ship while waving her hand dismissively. See you later, boys. Aang slapped his forehead and Zuko grumbled to himself, crossing his arms. By the time the two of them went inside the shop, Azula had already been searching through the numerous shelves. Resignedly, the two boys took a look around for themselves. He found all kinds of items for sale tucked into nooks and crannies that he'd expect pirates to plunder, old pieces of jewelry, strange statuettes, gems of dubious quality, weapons for ceremony rather than function, but one thing in particular caught his eye. Behind a glass case, an open scroll depicted a figure in black ink that moved through a fire-bending form, the flames themselves made from gold leaf that looked almost real in the light of the lanterns. The name of the ability was the Fire Funnel, and a scribbled note advertised that the rest of the forms could only be seen with the purchase of the scroll. Underneath the display scroll, on a shelf, he spotted a copy of it rolled up on a plush cushion as if the universe itself offered Aang the scroll. Nice. Aang said quietly to himself, snagging the scroll. Okay guys, let's go. I've seen enough here. I haven't looked at everything yet, Azula muttered to him. He let her catch a glimpse of the scroll with the emblem of the Fire Nation on it, and slipped it into his clothes. Her eyes widened. Okay, suddenly I've had enough of this place. Let's go, Zuzu. What? Why? Just come on. Aang ushered him quietly. He froze when the pirate captain appeared in front of him, blocking his way with crossed arms. The parrot on his shoulder caught at him, and Sabi, on Aang's shoulder, cowered behind his head. Not going to buy anything? The pirate asked him, raising an eyebrow. Sorry, we don't have any money, Aang said to him with a straight face, looking him right in the eye. The pirate nodded and let him pass. Off you go, then, he said, gesturing for them to leave. Aang breathed a sigh of relief and quickly walked off of the boat with Azula, Zuko following behind at a hurried pace. What was that about? Zuko asked, once they were almost out of sight of the boat. Just keep walking, Aang said. Hey, you kids. Get back here. The pirate vendor yelled to them. Run. Aang shouted to the other two. He took off at Zuko and Azula's speed, choosing not to abandon them with his airbending. He heard more pirates jumping off of the ship and drawing weapons behind them, their growls threatening and their feet hammering on wooden planks more than enough to urge the trio into flight. Looking back at the pirates, Aang didn't notice until it was too late that he plowed straight into Sokka. Prince Sokka's ship is docked here, Bato thought with a grin. He rubbed the golden artifact of the Fire Nation between his fingers. It was truly a beautiful thing, and he knew it would make an excellent gift for the young princess of the Southern Water Tribe. With this, he knew, he would be able to capture the Avatar. And since Prince Sokka is here, the Avatar must not be far. A troop of soldiers followed him off his ship. Sokka squeezed the bridge of his nose in annoyance as his grandmother held up the white, animal-shaped whistle admiringly. The Avatar's friends kept running in the direction of the jungle. "You know, I just realized," his grandmother said to the Avatar, staring at the broken whistle with wide eyes. "Is this meant to be the same shape as your bison?" The Avatar wrested himself from Sokka's grip, blowing a mighty gust of wind from his gullet that tore the helms off of Sokka's men behind him and almost ripped Sokka off of his feet. He managed to pull up the water underneath the docks in an attempt to bind the airbender, but he leapt too high and hurled a fireball down at the dock. The wood went up in flames that separated Sokka from his grandmother, with her on the side closer to the Avatar, and even though Sokka extinguished them quickly, the Avatar had taken the time to make his retreat, speeding off in pursuit of his friends as little more than an orange and yellow blur. "Yes, it is," he shouted back at them, presumably answering his grandmother's question. "Thanks for this." Sokka paused for a moment and stared after them, annoyed at his failure to fully set his trap for them in time. He hadn't expected the Avatar to arrive so soon. He cupped his hands over his mouth and shouted after the Avatar. "Enjoy your brand new fire-bending scroll." "Now did they really have to take my whistle?" Kunna asked him, pouting. Aang grinned childishly and pocketed the bison whistle, running right past the unrecognizable old woman that was with Sokka. He didn't care that he just ran right past his old friend. He knew Sokka would be joining the chase in a moment, if he was any bit as determined as Zuko used to be. The pirates continued to chase after him, Zuko, and Azula as they twisted throughout the spider web of docks, pushing past shoppers and street vendors with as much haste as they could manage. The pirates behind them bowled over all of the people. Aang's eyes widened as an old man pushed a cart full of cabbages right in their path, but Aang jumped over it with airbending as Zuko and Azula dashed around him. The old man sighed with relief, but Azula turned around quickly and released an arc of flame on the cart to bar the pirate's path, burning the load of cabbages. "My cabbages!" the old man shouted in agony. Sokka, Kunna, and the other pirate waterbenders put out the second fire, blocking their way in a hurry, but by the time the flames cleared, the Avatar was gone. "Captain Seekin, how did you let the boy escape?" Kunna asked the pirate captain. "He was right on board." "And you let him get away?" Sokka exclaimed, turning to him. The crew of the Silver Moon was a group of independent water tribe soldiers that claimed villages under the name of the Water Nation, even if they were technically also pirates. The captain's voice came out gruff. "I thought you had a plan to capture the kid." "A trap of sorts." "That kid is the Avatar." "We need him," Sokka said. "And yeah, but how was I supposed to know he'd show up so soon? I didn't have enough time to get it all ready. And he stole my whistle." Kunna interjected. The old woman was ignored. "We can work together to get him back," the prince said, scratching his chin. "We'll easily outnumber him. Maybe I don't need such a convoluted plan. He could adapt easily." This would only be a minor setback. They still had the real fire-bending scroll. "Aang, you scared me for a second there. I never thought that stupid whistle would work. It barely made a sound," Zuko said with relief, recounting their tale as Appa landed back in their previous campsite. "I thought we were surrounded." "Bison have very sensitive ears," Aang said with a smile, patting Appa on the head. "Good job, boy." The bison moaned in agreement. "Let's take a look at that fire-bending scroll," Azula said directly, getting close to Aang as he struggled to get it from beneath his shirt. She tried to look over his shoulder as he unfurled it. "I don't care that you stole it from pirates, they deserved it." Aang smiled to himself. Katara would have been proud of him. "Give me some room to breathe." Aang complained to her, but she didn't move. Aang sighed and peered at the scroll's contents. He could already control the fire inside of him. All he needed to do was learn the more complex style of fire-bending all over again. Considering that Azula's lesson of the basics jogged his memory, he figured that it wouldn't be too hard. "Okay, hold it up. Let me learn it first, and then I'll let you have a go," Azula said, taking a step back from Aang. "Wait. Aang said, frowning. The parchment was nowhere near the quality he had been expecting, and when he opened it, he saw a crudely drawn stick figure in blotchy black ink with a massive tongue sticking out of its face. Below it, he saw a simple message. Fooled you. He threw the scroll up in the air, the paper rustling as it fell to the ground. Ugh. It's a fake. A fake? What do you mean? Azula asked, brow furrowing. He stared at the mockery with contempt. Sokka planted this there to trap us. I know it. Zuko groaned. You mean we just did all that for nothing? Aang clenched his own hair between his fingers, annoyed and not completely surprised that Sokka had managed to outsmart them. He should have seen it coming. The scroll sat in such an obvious place, its cushion offering it up as temptation, while the open scroll above had been meant to just grab their attention. Wait, Aang said. This one may be fake, but there was a real scroll there. Right above it, on the wall. There's no way we're going back for that, Zuko said. They'll expect it. Azula clenched her fist as if in victory. Yes, but you got a good look at that real scroll, right, Aang? Can't you just imitate what you saw of it? Aang put his hands on his hips, trying to recall the memory of it. Well, it was only one form. The fire funnel. And I don't know, I didn't really study it that closely. Azula frowned. Are you serious? One glance should be all you need to take in every little detail. Sorry, my memory isn't as good as yours. She groaned and waved her hand at him. Ugh, fine, fine. Just remember what you can and we'll try to figure it out together. Aang rolled his eyes, but complied. He pictured the scroll in his mind, tried to imitate the form only instead of calling forth flames. He repeated his movements and Azula followed. It felt clumsy at first, and a little stiff, but with each repetition they eased into what felt like a proper fire-bending form. He hoped it wouldn't be a repeat of last time, with Katara. Azula took a solid stance, circling her arms to rest in front of her for a moment, and closed her eyes and concentrated. Zuko and Aang watched intently. She turned away from Aang and opened her eyes, a spark of gold shining through them. She slowly and steadily placed her right hand above her left, palms facing each other, and pulled them away with a snap. Fire roared to life and shot out of her hands in a steady wave, but Aang immediately knew that it wasn't the correct result when the flames fizzled out without taking shape. Azula knew this, too. She was livid. You obviously remember it wrong, she told him. It's not my fault. You could have looked at it, too. The fire is supposed to spiral, Aang noted. The fire spirals outward so that it can't be blocked easily by other benders. It was a penetrating, offensive attack. Aang found it odd that Azula couldn't perform the ability on her first try. He didn't think the girl could fail much of anything. Let me try. The Avatar stepped forward and adopted the fire-bending stance. His face was set and ready as he gathered the warmth inside of him, taking a deep breath. Fire-bending is all about the breath. He stepped forward, spun once, exhaled, and ripped his arms apart. The orange flames released, twisting through the air in a loose spiral that expanded as it burned further away from him. They dissipated in the air moments later. Aang smirked as he felt the heat on his face. He was one step ahead of Azula. You'll get it sooner or later, Aang said to her. Azula sent a narrow-eyed glare at him. Her amber eyes flicked open, the fire from their kemp reflecting off of them. The girl sat straight up and took one look over her sleeping comrades, and with silent, sure footing, she walked out among the ring of trees and into the jungle that wasn't unlike the one in which she was raised. She moved a safe distance away from camp, intent on going where they wouldn't hear her and wake. She slowly inched away from them, and when she judged that she was safe, she turned to look in front of her to walk at a normal speed, but jumped slightly when she saw the large, round eyes of the lemur staring at her. Sabi purred. Quiet, Azula hissed at her, sending her scampering away. She resumed her stealthy walking through the overgrowth, thankful for the heavy moss that stifled the sound of her footsteps. She didn't care that training by a river in the early hours of the morning was probably a bad idea, but she was so intently focused on mastering the ability that she couldn't think of anything else. Just the thought of Aang surpassing her in bending irked her, when she had been fire-bending her whole life and he had just started. She felt like she lost control of the situation. Azula hated things that were out of her control. Where would they be, sir? Captain Seekin asked Sokka. They sailed along the river with one of Sokka's own patrol boats as the pirate ship followed close behind. Somewhere along here. Their bison couldn't have gone far, Sokka said, intently searching along the sides of the river. Do you think they'll give my whistle back? Kunna asked him hopefully. Wait a minute, Sokka said, eyes squinting as he scanned the forest. What's that? In the distance, right along the shoreline, he spotted smoke clouds rising above the trees, the telltale sign of a fire that burned on moist wood. Fire streamed from Azula's fists as she sighed with frustration. Why couldn't she get this move? She tried everything, but the fire refused to twist to her will. It was supposed to twirl into a funnel-like shape, but she couldn't get the fire to spin consistently. She moved her bangs out of her eyes with her fingers, but they fell right back into place. The sounds of leaf cicadas had begun to get on her nerves, frazzling her state of mind even further. She sucked in a deep breath and tried the fire funnel 3 times in quick succession, but the flames spun through the air and dissipated when they were out of her reach. On her 4th try, a gust of wind blew just as she let off the attack, blowing the fire in the completely wrong direction and setting one of the trees aflame. Azula cursed. She directed the fire out into the river for a reason. The fire quickly grew, lighting the whole tree up as a beacon for the world to see. Azula grasped at the flames, attempting to pull them back under her control, but one of the other mangroves caught them and its leaves quickly lit up, hot enough even despite the heavy moisture. She pulled some of the fire into a steady stream where she dissipated it into the air, but by that time, the smoke soon engulfed the area. Azula coughed. She didn't think her flames would burn this hot, especially not hot enough to catch the jungle on fire. Her anger had gotten away from her and she hated it. Where's that little twerp when you need him? She said under her breath. The heat rolled over her, making breathing difficult. She was covered in sweat. She had to get back to the others and warn them about the fire and made that her first priority. She tried to move forward, but a burning branch fell into her path, blocking off her escape. The only way to go was backwards, into the river. She was about to do so when a large wave of water washed over one of the trees, extinguishing the fire. Great. Could the situation get any worse? I think I'd prefer the forest fire. She took one of her more familiar fire-bending stances and turned her back on the fire as another wave of water crashed into the trees. There was a small group of Water Nation soldiers on the river's other banks, controlling the waves. They were trying to avoid hitting her. She had no time to think about that new development because strong hands enclosed around her neck. Her first reaction was to elbow the person's gut, making him let go of her with a grunt. She turned quickly to see one of the pirates from earlier. Pressurized fire came to life between her fingers and hit the man in the stomach, making him double over. She ran back towards the forest fire, which was slowly being put out, but another pirate blocked her path. She used both hands to shoot a jet of fire at him, knocking him backwards. She bit her lip. What did she get herself into this time? She had to get to Aang and Zuko. They needed to get out of here, and quickly. As she took her first step into the trees, another set of rough hands grabbed her wrists, and the next thing she knew, she was looking into the fierce, one-eyed gaze of Prince Sokka. He spoke to her, his voice rough. I'll save you from the pirates. Azula glared at Sokka as he stood in front of her flanked by a group of his warriors and pirates. An old woman she might have seen before was also with him. They had Azula tightly bound against one of the unburned trees, surrounding her. Now that you're here, tell me where the Avatar is, Sokka said. Honestly, it'll be easier for all of us if you just talk. Do you really think I'll give in that easily? She asked. She would not bow to him and let him take Aang. Listen. He said, lowering his voice to be almost husky and walking towards her, peering at her with his one blue eye. He walked around behind the firebender and put his hands on her shoulders. She refused to follow him with her eyes as cold chills went up her spine at his touch. I've lost a lot in the past few years and my warrior's pride hinges on the Avatar's capture. Now, tell me where he is. You're smart. You and I could see eye to eye. She raised an eyebrow. Putting me on a little guilt trip and trying to flirt with me won't work. That's too bad. The Silver Moon crew will have to take him forcefully then, Sokka said, narrowing his eye at her. He pulled a scroll with a flame emblem from his clothes. And I can even throw this wonderfully authentic fire-bending scroll into the trade. And this one's actually real, I can prove it. You will never conquer Aang. I told you that last time, Azula said to him. Her eyes lingered on the fire-bending scroll for only a moment. Sokka, she has much faith in her friends. You would do well to take after her, the old woman said. Be quiet. Sokka yelled to her. I'll handle this. You'll ruin my image. Azula rolled her eyes. I didn't know you were such a loser, she said. Sokka then sent a glare at his grandmother. You probably don't even have friends. Sokka was about to retort when one of his soldiers notified him of another patrol boat approaching, a larger one coated in ice and flying the buffalo yak flag next to the water tribe insignia. Ugh, Bato, Sokka said, clenching his fists. He turned to his warriors. Go find the Avatar, now. Yes, sir, one of them said, and they all dispersed into the trees. Tell your men to find him, Sokka said to the pirate captain, pointing into the forest. The numerous pirates heard his order and trampled into the woods while Captain Seekin stayed with the prince. Azula counted the foes before her first. There was Sokka, who was distracted by the oncoming warship. Second, the old lady, who she didn't think of as much of a threat. The pirate captain was the last one there. She knew she could escape undetected. It would be too easy for her, it just had to be done before the other warship and more soldiers arrived. She began to rapidly heat up her hands. The ship was approaching fast, and it was close enough so that she could see a Water Nation man standing on the deck, smirking knowingly at Sokka. He was obviously high-ranked, but Sokka looked at him with deep hatred. She forced more heat into her hands, lighting a small fire in her palm. The other man's ship docked and he confidently strode off of it with 2 lines of soldiers flanking him. The object that he was casually tossing up and down in his hand made Azula's insides freeze, and all thoughts of escape left her. My headpiece! She shouted at him. Why do you have it? She tried to lunge forward at him, but the tight rope held her in place against the tree. Ah, so this belongs to you, the man named Bato said, examining the girl. It is out of place for a woman to demand things of a man she hardly knows, in the water tribes, at least. Screw the water tribe. Give that back, she nearly hissed, glaring daggers at him. No, not until it fulfills its purpose, Bato said, striding over to her. You're already here, but the Avatar was also supposed to be lured. I guess Prince Sokka couldn't perform the task correctly. He glanced over at the prince at the mention of his name. What are you doing here? Sokka demanded with barely contained anger. I'm going to catch the Avatar. You stay out of this. Are you so sure about that? Bato asked him with a knowing grin. Men, go search for the Avatar. Azula turned her amber gaze to the forest as more soldiers stormed inside, hoping that Aang and her brother would somehow escape. Zuko opened his eyes, hearing the uneven trample of feet on the forest floor. He sat up quickly, grabbing his broadswords. Aang! He called to the younger boy. I know, he said, sitting up from his sleep. Water from the darkness of the forest around them shot out at the Avatar, but he quickly sucked his staff into his hands and stood, making a full circle in the air and swinging his weapon, unleashing furious winds on the people in the trees. Azula! Zuko shouted to his sister, looking over at her sleeping bag. He gasped when she noticed her absence. Aang! She's missing. Aang rolled his eyes at Zuko's words. I have a good feeling about where she is. Zuko looked over the top of the forest, where he could see the orange sun just beginning to rise, lighting up the sky. Aang quickly got up and rolled up his sleeping bag and the group's other things scattered around the camp while the enemy waterbenders were down. Zuko helped him by throwing all of it onto Appa's back. Sabi curled around one of the bison's horns, ready to leave the area. Appa, get out of here! Aang shouted to his bison, once everything from their camp was gone. We have to find Azula. The bison groaned and reluctantly flew into the air, just as more streams of water shot out at Aang. He blocked one of them with a punch of fire but was able to duck and dodge around the rest, pushing his fists together and expanding an air barrier outwards, throwing off the water. Zuko unsheathed his swords and followed Aang as he rushed off into the forest. Aang swung his staff at one warrior and held it behind him while he used his other hand to make a wheel formation and blast another away with torrents of wind. A pirate with a blade staff and waterbending rushed to him, swinging his weapon to match Aang's glider. Aang slammed his staff into the ground, throwing the pirate into a tree with stunning force. Zuko, determined to not fall behind, dodged the spear point of one of the Water Nation soldiers by jumping into the trunk of a tree and pushing himself off of it with a strong kick, barreling into the soldier's side. The soldier, dazed, fell to the ground. Zuko dug his hands into the pouch on his belt and threw 3 of the needles Mai had given to him, pinning another soldier to a tree. He caught one of the pirates up on one of the branches, who was about to hit Aang with waterbending, by throwing Kunao through his water skin and dispatching him in close range after the initial distraction. The swordsman spotted a bulky pirate with an odd contraption in his hands aiming his weapon at Aang while his back had been turned. He tried shouting out a warning as the pirate aimed the hand cannons with a net suspended between them at Aang, but it failed to reach Aang in time and the net enclosed him from behind and trapped him against the ground. A moment later, a similar net rushed out at Zuko, knocking him down with its force. Aang immediately tried blasting himself free with fire, but it didn't do any good. "Nice try, but this is fireproof netting," the pirate said to him with a grin, dragging them off. Zuko felt hopeless. How was he going to save his sister now? The sun was getting steadily higher in the sky, but it had been less than an hour since the pirates and soldiers had gone off into the jungle to search. Now, the pirates were returning, and to Azula's chagrin, Aang and Zuko were with them, totally bound like her. Sokka looked satisfied, and even preened, as Captain Seekin strode over to them with a confident smirk. Bato looked disgruntled. "Keep the scroll," the pirate captain said, dismissing them all with a wave of his hand. "We've got the Avatar. He's much better than any piece of paper." "What?" Sokka yelled, infuriated. "You are disobeying direct orders." "I don't think the Water Emperor will mind when we turn in the Avatar to him," Seekin said. "The deal's off. We won." Bato's soldiers returned from the forest, looking a little worse for wear. They lined up behind him. "This isn't over," Bato said. He seemed almost as angry as Sokka. "You pirate rabble! I'll get the Avatar from you myself." "Oh," Kunna said quietly, inching away from the growing conflict. She put her hand on Sokka's shoulder. "Avoid direct conflict, grandson. Only the sneaky puffin lynx catches the snow mouse. I will find your warriors in the forest. We'll need them before we can leave this place." Azula listened to them with interest. When the old woman scurried off, Azula turned her attention back to the growing situation between the pirates and Bato's soldiers. She caught Aang's eye. As always, he didn't seem concerned. He knew a way out. He was waiting for something. The pirates hurried Aang and Zuko onto their ship as soon Bato ordered his soldiers to attack them. With their waterbending, the ship left the shore in seconds, going downriver. Bato's eyes thinned with anger. "Get back onto the ship, quickly, and chase them down," he ordered, pointing at his vessel. As they were all leaving, Sokka turned to Azula. It was just the 2 of them left at the riverside. "I'm going to propose a deal to you," he said quickly. "I know you want that flamed headpiece that Bato has. I'll help you get it. In return, you'll help me get the Avatar." "Agreed." Azula paused and stared him right in the eye, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. Of course, he laid it all out on the table, but she had to make sure. She was not going to be manipulated. She was going to do the manipulating. "I don't have all day," Sokka said through clenched teeth. "Fine, I'll do it. But only if we get my headpiece first," she said. She needed to be sure about that. He jumped back and forth between his feet. "Ugh, fine. We'll get your stupid headpiece." He was about to go untie her when Azula spread her arms out, letting the rope fall to the ground. "Use fireproof rope next time," she said, smirking. Sokka ignored her and stared out at the 2 ships in hot pursuit of each other. Waterbenders on board each were sending blocks of ice at each other, but it was doing nothing to harm the other ship. "Follow me," Sokka said, rushing out to the water. Azula ran after him and gripped his shoulders just in time for him to jump into the river, skating along the surface of it with his waterbending. A board of ice formed underneath them, mostly for Azula's benefit. They sped over to Bato's ship and Azula grinned, her hair being whipped by the wind. They gained on Bato's ship fast, and in one quick movement, Sokka shifted his arms to send them both sailing through the air, where they landed on the deck of the riverboat. Bato, who was at the front of the ship, turned to them. "You're working with this savage firebender to fight against me? Who'd have guessed you'd sink so low?" the man said, spreading his legs into a waterbending stance. Sokka copied his movement. "Gotta make up for you trying to steal my prey, you know." Azula hurled a blast of fire at Bat-P, careful not to slip on the icy deck. "You have something I want." Bato melted the ice along his deck and pulled up a sheet of water to block her attack. Sokka hit the man with a stream of water, knocking him into the balustrade, and then looked back at Azula. "I'm only helping you because I want to take him down myself." "That's fine with me," she said offhandedly to him, switching her target to one of Bato's soldiers, who was advancing on her. She swept her hand out, hitting him with a trail of flames. The burning man threw himself overboard as another spear-wielding soldier lunged at her. She knocked away the shaft of the spear with her foot and kicked a small ball of fire at him, tumbling him backward. A group of 3 more soldiers decided to attack her at once. At that moment, she thought of only one attack that could take them all down at once. She straightened her posture and took a deep breath, circling her hands in front of her to rest under her chest, holding them one above the other. Her palms faced each other. She focused on the soldiers and the flames within her and abruptly ripped her hands apart, and a rapid, spinning inferno leapt out at them from where her hands were moments before, storming right through their weak water defenses. She smirked when she noted the success of the fire funnel as the 3 burning men jumped overboard. Aang watched the disturbance on Bato's ship, spotting the fire funnel shoot off at a group of soldiers. Azula fought and sided with Sokka against a common enemy. Aang didn't think too much about seeing Bato for the first time. He realized that he was an enemy, and there was nothing else to it. Escaping safely was more important at the moment. Aang judged that the ruckus on Bato's ship was a sufficient distraction, so he hit the pirate holding him with a blast of air, knocking him out as he flew into the balustrade. Aang jumped high enough to hit the other pirate holding Zuko with an air-powered kick to the face, knocking him unconscious. Aang cut the rope binding his wrists with the knocked-out pirate's sword, freeing his hands. He picked up Zuko's broadswords to cut Zuko's own binds and returned the weapons to him. More pirates on deck noticed that the 2 escaped, but Aang airbended his staff over to him too quickly for the pirate to reach the 2, swinging it out at him and knocking him overboard. Zuko parried the blades of another pirate and jabbed his enemy in the chest with his hilts, hammering him backward. The young swordsman sliced at another pirate, cutting him deeply enough to keep him from fighting but not enough to seriously wound him. Aang bended a funnel of air that pulled 2 pirates into it and flung them off the ship, hitting a third one immediately after with a fire funnel. Flames erupted from his staff as he swung it, causing havoc on the small pirate ship. The pirate captain himself stormed up to the 2, challenging them to a sword fight. Zuko was the first to meet the challenge head-on, swinging his swords recklessly at him. The captain dodged the blows easily and punched him with the hilt of his sword, sending the fighter off to the side. Aang did not want the fight to last long, so he jabbed the nose of his staff into the ground and hit the pirate with a burst of air from the back of it, sending him reeling. Aang took the chance and hit him again with an uppercut, launching him up into the air, where Aang jumped up to meet him. Before the pirate could realize where he was, Aang slammed him into the water with airbending. He landed safely on the deck of the ship a moment later, pulling his new whistle from his pocket and calling Appa. Streams of water from both sides of the ship rose up to Sokka's hands, and he sent them as one to attack Bato. The enemy waterbender was knocked off of the ship and into the water, where Sokka raised his hands and sent a continuous flow of water upward, holding Bato suspended in front of the moving ship. He breathed outward, freezing the water and holding the clan chief in place. Sokka smirked in triumph. He had gotten much better. The next moment, Bato's ship crashed into the ice pillar that imprisoned Bato, ripping through the wooden bow. Bato just narrowly escaped being crushed by his own ship when Sokka barely managed to unfreeze him and let him fall into the river. Sokka and the firebender girl stumbled as the ship rocked even as she continued to fight Bato's warriors. She held up against them remarkably well, he had to admit. The Avatar's bison flew close to the ship a moment later, with the Avatar and the clumsy swordsman on his back. The firebender looked up at him and nodded, and winds surrounded her a moment later. The Avatar used his airbending to pull her up to him, where she landed safely on the bison's back. Azula called down to Sokka. "Sorry, the deal's off," she shouted, waving at him with 2 fingers and a coy smile. Sokka stared after her coldly as the Avatar flew away. He looked down at his feet once the Avatar's bison flew out of his sight. It was then that a glint of gold caught his eyes. Bato must have dropped it. Sokka picked up the firebender's flamed headpiece and clutched it in his grip, staring out at the horizon. The Avatar would yet be his. Azula sighed with relief as she stretched on Appa's back. Well, that was a long and eventful day, she mused. Yeah, all because of that fire-bending scroll, Aang said, sitting with them. That was a mean trick you played on Sokka, you know. Yeah, but it didn't matter, she said. I didn't really get what I wanted. What did you expect me to do, hand you over to him? You wanted your headpiece, didn't you? Where is it? Aang asked. I didn't get it. But it's fine, I didn't hold out on my part of the deal, either, she said, picking at her nails. Zuko crossed his arms. That was really dangerous, Azula. Yeah, I know. But no harm done, right? She asked, reclining against the back of the saddle. No, Aang said. He wished he could have been the one to fight alongside Sokka, but would his old friend ever want to? Too bad we don't have that fire-bending scroll, though. Who says we don't have it? Azula asked, waving it tauntingly at him. Zuko perked up. How'd you get your hands on that? I snagged it from Sokka before I left, she said. Now we can both learn more fire-bending together. She locked eyes with Aang. Let's see who can learn everything on the scroll first. Aang grinned at her. I'm impressed. You're on. Check the description for the links to the author.